Hello there. I'm gonna beat Kerbal Space Program again. That's right, starting from a fresh blank science mode save, I'm gonna have to go from building barely flight-worthy nuggets to space stations, satellite networks, and Eve returns. I've played science mode before, but I've had a few comments recently suggesting that I do it again, but not as a tutorial. Instead, just have a fun old time designing rockets that are overly complex and probably ill-conceived to beat the game in an entertaining and perhaps, dare I say, inspiring way for people already familiar with it. And I'm going to keep things stock, but with all the beautification mods that turn the game from this slop into a beautiful game. That sentence started well, at least. So, these are going to be my game settings. It's going to be a science mode save. Here are the difficulty settings. It's all left on default, with ComNet enabled, of course. And of course, we've got to name it Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. Good lord, that's loud! This is the tech tree. We're going to have to unlock every single node on this thing in order to officially beat the game. Right now, we've only got the very first node available, which gives us not a lot of stuff to work with for our first rocket. If we head on over to the VAB, you can see that our selection of spaceship spares is so scarce, our sole solution is a simple sorry rocket of a single SRB, 4 goo sciences, a single seat pod, and shoot. Seriously, this is literally it. And I'll stop with the alliteration now. Seriously. But in all seriousness, our science collection has begun. I ran a crew report with Jebediah Kerman on the pad. We then went on EVA, took an EVA report, made sure to take the crew report from the pod and then restore it so we can do another one later on. Then we can run our first mystery goo experiment and then we can launch. So now that we're airborne, we can run our next mystery goo experiment. The goo jiggles and wobbles as it flies. We're gathering science from, flying through Kerbin's atmosphere. We can then do a crew report as well. That was why it was very important to take the crew report from the launch pad. I know I'm sort of talking through the mission at this stage, even though I said this wasn't meant to be a tutorial, but, just sort of providing context in case someone here has not played science mode before. I don't know. And I guess that, some people might be using this as a tutorial. I'm not sure. I wouldn't recommend it, but I will still mention kind of the key things I'm doing, at least in the first kind of few missions / episodes, where, you'll be seeing concepts that you might not be used to seeing before. You ready? The chute is now deploying. The craft has stabilized, so now it's going to be a good idea for Jebediah Kerman to go on EVA, take our crew report out again, and then store it so we can run another crew report when splashed down, and we can do an EVA report whilst out here as well. That's why I took the crew report mid-air rather than waiting until splashdown, because we've got to go on EVA anyway, do an EVA report. And now it's just a case of time warping down to our splashdown point. Are you ready? There we go. It is a historic moment. Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one, has landed. Its very first craft. We can run our last little bits of science. Jebediah Kerman go on EVA and somehow take a surface sample. Must have dived pretty quickly and deeply there to get that, and then we can recover our vessel and see what rewards we can reap. Is that the correct way of saying that? Reap what? I'd see what science we can unlock. And the answer is not a lot. I only have 58.2 science points, so really rather limited in what we can unlock at this stage. I'm really going to be prioritizing the bottom kind of half of the tech tree, because that half contains the science experiments. And obviously the more science experiments you're running on a mission, well, the more science you're going to rack up, the more points you get, the faster we progress through the tech tree. So I've unlocked the thermometer and the barometer. And that was kind of the objective after the first flight. Now I'm just sort of having a look at the other tabs available to us. And I eventually decided that I would unlock general rocketry as the other thing I unlock after our first flight. It really doesn't matter. You kind of need every node of the tech tree, so there's not really many consequences to unlocking things, in the wrong order, so to speak. But general rule of thumb, we want to be prioritizing the science branch, at least until we get the science junior. That's kind of the main goal we want to be working towards at the very beginning of our Kerbal Space Program, a science mode career. Anyway, as you can see, I'm currently speed building our second rocket. It consists of 8 FLT-200 tanks powered by the swivel engine with 4 little fins for guidance. We've got 2 mystery goo experiments as well as the thermometer and barometer, the 2 science experiments we unlocked using the science earned from our first flight. And for this one, we're going to be launching from the runway. So as you can see, the rocket is now primed on the runway, ready to lift off. The reason I'm launching from the runway is because in the eyes of the game, the runway is a different biome to the launch pad, which means we can gather science from the runway that's different to the science we can gather while stationary on the launch pad. That's why we're launching from the runway in this instance. It's not very much science, but small amounts of science go a long way in the early game. I'm also using Bob Kerman here because he's a scientist Kerbal, and he can restore the mystery goo units. They can be used more than once, and later on the Science Junior as well. So he's going to be our main man for the time being. So we've run all of our science experiments, done a crew report, taken the crew report from the pod and stored it back in again. And with that said and done, it's time to launch. I probably should have mentioned actually that if you do actually want a tutorial for KSP rather than, non-specific commentary, well, I guess my commentary has been fairly in-depth up until this point, but later on it certainly won't be. If you do want a tutorial series for unlocking the tech tree in Kerbal Space Program Science Mode, I do have a full Lowne Aerospace playlist. I'll link it in the description. There'll be a card on the screen right now as well, if you want to check that out. But yeah, I did say at the beginning of the video that the kind of idea for Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one, would be just kind of a fun playthrough with kind of cool craft designs that wouldn't necessarily be very good for a beginner to try and replicate. But obviously, kind of not the case for this particular, I guess I was going to say this part of the video, but kind of the first series of missions, because we don't really have a great deal of parts to work with. So the rockets we're building are going to be very similar to the kind of rockets you'd build in a tutorial style series, because like I say, there's only a very, very small number of parts that we can get our hands on. So yeah, I'm kind of just following the kind of mission plans of Lowne Aerospace 2, the second one, where I've launched this rocket into space on a suborbital trajectory mine, so we can gather science from the lower atmosphere, the upper atmosphere, and indeed space near to Kerbin. I also launched backwards, right? So normally in Kerbal Space Program, your gravity turn goes 90 degrees on the nav ball, so kind of with Kerbin's rotation, so that, you save a bit of fuel getting to orbit. But in this case, I wanted to get to a different biome, and in this case, I decided to go for the desert just because, we'll be landing in various different biomes after each mission, and purely anecdotally this, I feel like the desert is the biome I land in the least amount when it comes to returning from missions. I guess maybe just the location of the deserts isn't really very well placed for random landing encounters. I don't know. So we're going to go to the desert for the second mission, and as you can see, the desert is below us. We are re-entering. As you can see, we didn't burn up much ablator, so that's why I reduced the amount of ablative material on our heat shield, because we really did need to be carrying that excess mass. And as you can see, all of our science experiments are attached to the pod itself, so we can kind of run experiments flying over the Kerbin Desert biome. And with that, we are now landed in the Kerbin Desert biome. So of course, Bob Kerman can go out on EVA and gather a surface sample, as well as do an EVA report. We can also take the existing crew report from the pod and then run another one. And we've just run that now, so now we can recover the vessel and see how much science we earned. 159 points. Gosh, I feel like a millionaire. And so I immediately rushed to the R&D building and unlocked basic science, which, as you can see, contains the Science Junior experiment. So yeah, the amount of science we're going to be netting from missions going forward is going to be more. We're going to get more science from missions. That sentence started off better in my head. And unlocking that node was really my only objective after doing our second mission. So after this, doesn't really matter a great deal what we're unlocking. I decided to go for advanced rocketry and stability. But, if you want to unlock a different node, then that's okay. That's fine. So let us crossfade back to the vehicle assembly building and begin speed assembling our third launch vehicle. Now, this is very, very similar to the rocket used on our second mission, but instead of bringing mystery goo and the thermometer and the barometer with us, we're going to be bringing Science Junior units with us, because of course that's the new science thing that we've unlocked. I started off with 3 units until I remembered that actually we only need 2 units, because we have Bob Kerman on board who can restore one of them mid-flight. So there's the rocket there. The reason I needed more than one Science Junior unit was because I want to run a Science Junior experiment in the lower atmosphere and the upper atmosphere, and that will be during the rocket's ascent, and Bob can't go on EVA during the ascent to reset the units for what are hopefully fairly obvious reasons. You can go on EVA to reset the Science Junior though from the experiment we just ran from the launch pad, and now we can launch. There we are, staging. I don't want any comments, by the way, commenting about the appearance of the rocket with those solid rocket boosters attached, by the way, in the comments. Please refrain, keep things family friendly. As you can see, I have now run the topmost Science Junior experiment because we're in the lower atmosphere. You can kind of see our flying situation in the top middle right, the Kerbal Engineer readouts there. It says situation, it says we're flying low. I'm just going to wait until that says flying high, and then we can run the other Science Junior experiment. Now I'm holding kind of a 45-degree angle of attack here, and I'm actually, there we are, we've just changed the situation to flying high, so I've now run the other Science Junior experiment. I haven't got to do anything like a crew report or obviously mystery goo, thermometer, etc., because we've done those on previous flights. As you can see, I'm holding this fairly steep angle of attack because I want our apoapsis to not be orbital, but instead be above 250 kilometers. Because, like with the lower atmosphere and the upper atmosphere, there is science in space near to Kerbin, or in this case, the situation on Kerbal Engineer readout says in space low. Then you get different science for space high above Kerbin, or in space high. And space high around Kerbin starts at 250 kilometers. I think. I wasn't. This isn't a tutorial. I couldn't remember if it was 250, it was the cutoff, or 300 was the cutoff. So I made my apoapsis 303 just in case it was 300 kilometers. But I now see, watching the video with you guys, well, you know, I'm watching it ahead of time, right? Because you know how videos work. And I noticed actually we changed from in space low to in space high at 250 kilometers. Hey, maybe this is tutorial. Like I said, that's not going to be kind of what this series is about. But for the first kind of, you know, flights, it's going to be like that because there's only really so many ways you can build up your rockets to get the science needed to go and visit other, you know, celestial bodies in the game, have a fun old time exploring, planting flags and footprints, etc., etc. And, you know, this is a good time to talk about this because there we are, we've landed. That concludes the final terrestrial flight. Is that the correct nomenclature? I'm not sure. But basically, our next mission is going to be landing on the surface of... I didn't even try to like build suspense. We're going to be landing on Minmus, obviously, because that's kind of the next logical place to land with our tech that we've got. Like I say, early game, there are only so many things you can really realistically do. Minmus is kind of the most sensible option. I'm unlocking the electrics tab in the R&D building just because we need a solar panel, you know, a means of regenerating electric charge. And also I noticed that we have the EVA experiments kit in the miniaturization tab. So I decided to unlock that as well, just because that actually nets you quite a significant amount of science when you run the experiment while on EVA, which is going to be very, very helpful because I'm kind of playing by similar rules to Lowne Aerospace 2, in that I'm setting a rule where I can only land once on a certain planet or moon. So if I land on Minmus, I can't then biome hop, basically, to farm science and maximize our output. We get one chance to gather science from the surface of a planet or moon, and that's it. So again, it's not a tutorial because I'm not playing efficiently or sensibly, but doing it this way, just that we're kind of varying up the places that we go. And obviously, this means that this kind of encourages me to go to places that are a little bit harder to reach in order to net more science. Now, during this playthrough, I'm definitely going to include an Eve landing, and that's one of the reasons why you may have noticed, I know this is a brilliant time to bring this up this late into the video, that I've chosen to not have restock installed. So, you know, for a while now, I've been using the mod restock in my KSP videos. Basically, reskins all the stock parts, makes them look much nicer. But I've been told it's not quite fully visual. It does have a minimal impact on the aerodynamic performance of some of those parts, which generally, you know, in general, brilliant, it has a non-significant effect on gameplay. But Eve is a very challenging place to go to. And so kind of those margins can suddenly start having a bit of an impact. So mainly for the Eve mission, I wanted to make sure this was fully stock, only visual mods, and the restock I felt was just too far into the potentially game-altering territory. Just because a lot of I don't see a lot, but I see a few comments every now and then on the KSP subreddit saying, oh, I tried to follow Matt Lowndes' Eve tutorial and I couldn't launch. And everyone's saying, oh, well, you know, the game's probably updated since that came out and the rocket no longer works. And I want to prove that rocket does still work. The game has not changed significantly. Unfortunately, I don't want to sound like a douche here, guys, but it's probably a skill issue because Eve is very, very difficult to do a return from. And, you know, I just kind of want to prove that that video still works. Oh, I should probably point out that I've replaced Bob Kerman's parachute with the EVA experiments kit that we unlocked in the R&D building on our last unlock run. And look at that, Genesis 4 has launched. And you might be wondering, Matt, why have you built kind of the core first stage out of the really stumpy tanks? And to be honest, guys, I just wanted to have an orange first stage and make the rocket look cool. And, you know, the other size tanks I have can only be colored grey or white. So I decided to use these tanks, which probably wasn't the smartest idea in hindsight because look how wobbly this rocket is. When I designed it, I was like, oh, you know what, I'll just right-click it and press Auto Strut and use Auto Struts to keep the rocket, you know, not wobbly. But this is how I learned that you don't actually get the Auto Strut feature unless you have unlocked struts in the tech tree, like in the R&D building. And I haven't unlocked struts yet. Similarly, you can't do things like enable fuel crossfeed with radial decouplers, etc. until you actually unlock fuel lines. So there you are, a little tip if you didn't know that before. And so, yeah, as a consequence of the very, very wobbly rocket, it was very, very hard to control, sort of tipped over, and now we have this really, really inefficient flight ascent profile. My intention was to use the stage we're currently burning to circularize around Kerbin and then put us on a, you know, trajectory to get to Minmus. But now it's just going to be the stage that just gets us to low Kerbin orbit. In fact, we're not even going to circularize with it. I was like, well, we don't have a great deal of usable delta V left in the stage, 132 meters per second right now. So what is, I'll almost circularize with it, but then just before our periapsis crosses the Kármán line, we will stage and then circularize with the Minmus lander. The Minmus lander itself has plenty delta V to not only get to Minmus, but, you know, land on Minmus and then return back to Kerbin. So none of this was really an issue. I just kind of copied my Minmus lander design from my last playthrough of the tech tree, forgetting that I was using it to biome hop and maximize science output, and therefore, you know, making use of its elevated delta V levels. But hey, it kind of worked out quite well because I designed a terrible rocket to go underneath the lander, and therefore, you know, the lander's very, very over-engineered, well, not over-engineered, but surplus of fuel saved the mission, essentially. And so there we are. Bob Kerman has conducted the burn. There's going to, well, nearly anyway. There we are. We've got an encounter with Minmus. We're going to have to do a course correction burn, but that's fine. Again, we have a lot of delta V in this rocket. So yeah, I hope you guys are on board with the idea of this little science mode playthrough. A lot of people probably are going to be disappointed that it's not modded and it doesn't include things like Outer Planets mod or Planetary Base Systems mods or Station Pass mods, etc, etc. But I hear you, okay? So I plan on doing 2 playthroughs, right? This one, so stock but with beautification mods only, and then a second playthrough, not unlocking the normal tech tree, but unlocking the community tech tree, which is kind of built around, like the whole tech tree is balanced around loads of different mods. So I can't remember exactly what mods it uses, but I know it uses like Natea's mod. It's basically really popular mods, and I think there's some integration with the Outer Planets mod. I could be incorrect there, so I'll have to just figure this out, I guess, once this little playthrough has concluded. But look at this, we have entered Minmus's sphere of influence. Bob Kerman, whilst I was talking, was just diligently doing his duties as a Kerbinaut, a scientist Kerbinaut, in fact. So he went on EVA, well, he read a crew report, went on EVA, took the crew report from the pod, then did an EVA report, did all the other science experiments as well, and restored the Science Junior and Mystery Goo. That way we can do all of that again now in space low to Minmus. Obviously, when we just entered its sphere of influence, we were in space high above Minmus. Now we can do it again in low to Minmus. In case you're kind of wondering why you even need to continually go on EVA to take the crew report from the command pod and then store it, and then you can magically run another one. That's because basically if you think of the crew pod like a science experiment, like the mystery goo, basically you right-click it, you run the experiment, it then stores the experiment on board. The Kerbal has to then take the experiment out, and then, I guess mystery goo is a bad example. It's more like the thermometer or barometer where you can run them infinite number of times without restoring them. You just basically take the experiment out of the thermometer, then the thermometer can run again. Same thing with the command pod. So it's just a bit of an annoying quirk with Kerbal Space Program 1 that was beautifully handled in KSP2. KSP2's science mode, management system was light years ahead of KSP1, as it should have been, right? The whole game should have been better than KSP1, but, here we are, I guess. Here we are coming down over the serene Greater Flats region of Minmus. Yeah, I'm very devoid of creativity, aren't I? I'm like, we'll land on the flats because that's just the easy place to land on Minmus. And I'm so yet not over. Let's try that whole sentence again. I'm still not yet over the beautification that comes with Games Links' Parallax Continued, which kind of creates this lovely little icy reflective surface on the surface of the flats. So yeah, there's a good reason to still visit the Minmus flats even now, because we have these wonderful mods installed for us. So now we've got down to the surface, we can do a few things. Bob can first of all grab a surface sample and an EVA report, and then you can walk over here to conduct perhaps the most important task of any Kerbal Space Program landing, and that is, of course, planting our very first Lowne Aerospace flag. So Genesis 4. I kind of call the first rockets of a playthrough the Genesis class because they always kind of look the same, right? So it's one class of rocket, and it's Genesis because Genesis means the beginning, right? And then we can run our EVA experiment, which is a little game of golf, it seems. There we are. Isn't that lovely? Not quite sure what could be gained from that, but Kerbals can apparently get 125 units of science from those EVA experiments, which is really, really good. I guess, it's kind of the same caliber as a surface sample, right, where a robot can't do the experiment. You have to be able to get a Kerbal down to the surface and then get that Kerbal back home in order to get the science. That's why I guess the reward is high. I guess we kind of have to ignore the fact that Kerbal could just get on board a vessel with an antenna and transmit the data back, but that's not really in the spirit of it, right? You want to be able to get that Kerbal home, get that little green frog back to their families on Kerbin, wherever their family lives. There are, of course, no cities or buildings of any kind on Kerbin aside from the space centers and I guess things like the pyramids. Is that a spoiler? Sorry guys, there are pyramids on Kerbin, but I haven't said where. I have done videos to them that were completely accidental. Was just flying around Kerbin and I was like, oh look, there's the pyramids. I didn't even know they were there. I just knew. So yeah, that's it's getting late. I've been recording for a little while. Well, 25 minutes. And obviously this is like where I start to flag in terms of keeping things on track, especially because, it's an early game playthrough. We are in the early game of the full playthrough. So I kind of want to keep things a bit on track just because I feel like people are like getting into Kerbal Space Program all the time. They're going to see this on my channel. They're probably going to Google first missions of science fair playthrough, and this is what going to come up as a suggested video. So people are probably going to watch this to help them build their own spacecraft anyway. So at least for kind of the first few flights, I'll keep things semi-informative, like explaining what I'm doing. But then once we're on to things like Eeloo, Lathe, Eve, what's the other moon of Jewel called? Tylo, that was it. I don't know why that name escaped me so long. Like the other challenging moon of Jewel, I should say. Like once you do all those places, it's not going to be like, right, now you've got to do this. Like it's just going to be, well, I don't know, who knows? Those sometimes my videos can just spiral into, chaotic streams of consciousness. So very much looking forward to meandering down those chaotic streams of consciousness with all of you up there to watch. What a brilliant advert for my channel. I just said that people trying to get into this game for the first time, they're going to find this video. This is their introduction to me. I hope it was a good sell. But yes, we have now staged. So now we are going to re-enter. Well, we are re-entering the atmosphere. I have better time warp installed in addition to the beautification mods, just so I can get faster than 4x physics warp, which is why you might have seen the thing shake about just a bit then, because I forgot I had that physics time warp setting installed, and well, yeah, the game didn't quite like that very much. But now we are below the clouds, and yeah, just ran a little cheeky crew report. We can then go on EVA, take the data and store it and then run another one on touchdown. But going forward after this, science from Kerbin is going to be fairly negligible in terms of the science we're gaining from landing on whatever celestial body we're going to. In fact, to be honest, I don't even know why I bothered running it just then, because the data we got from Minmus is exponentially more valuable than the data we're getting from Kerbin. But I guess that didn't stop me from doing one last little EVA to get a surface sample and EVA report and all that. And look at that! 1,148.5 sites is available to us to spend to our heart's content. So, struts. Definitely one of the things I definitely wanted to unlock. So I've unlocked the node that contains struts. And then from there, I just had a little scan of what's available. I decided that it would be sensible to unlock flight control because then we get a little reaction wheel and some better tail fins. I also unlocked aviation because it was very cheap, and then space exploration as well, and advanced flight control for, I guess, just because we're going to need all the nodes, aren't we? And we got landing as well, so we got some bigger landing gear at our disposal for future flights. Then I just continued browsing what we had available and decided that fuel systems would be very useful to have because then we get the fuel line and the ability to enable crossfeed on decouplers. Then we got heavy rocketry, so we can build heavy rockets. And then I unlocked heavier rocketry, so we can build even bigger rockets, giving us the mainsail engine as well. Now we're sort of dwindling in terms of how much science we have remaining. Advanced exploration is objectively good because it has the lab, but I'm banning myself from using that in this playthrough. And then I noticed the command modules node. This contains an Apollo-style lunar lander can and an Apollo-style command pod. And considering that, it makes sense that our second mission goes to the Mun, we can now do a proper Apollo-style Mun mission with Apollo-style pieces for that. So yes, very much deviating now from tutorials for beginners. I then unlocked advanced construction just because, don't know, thought the parts looked pretty good. So I didn't really think it through beyond that, to be honest. And then the final node that I decided to unlock was propulsion systems. The little Oscar B tank is always useful. So yeah, and that about pretty much does it. We've only got 63.5 science remaining, so not enough to unlock anything else for now. But now, playtime is over. It's time to start heading to more challenging frontiers, namely the Mun. And even though this is only our second proper, for real space flight, I wanted to set myself the challenge of doing it Apollo style. And so that's going to be what we do for our next launch. So we are now back in the vehicle assembly building, beginning construction. Even though we unlocked quite a lot of stuff, our parts list on the left is still a little lacking. So at a minimum, I wanted to use the stock analog parts for the Apollo command module and the Apollo lunar lander, and then sort of just build the whole rocket around that. And I began with the lander, since it was going to be the trickiest part of the build, purely because of how difficult it is to elegantly integrate the Science Junior into landers, and also because, like Apollo, I wanted this to be a two-stage lander. The first stage lands, and the second stage lifts the command pod away from the lander base as a fairly minimalist spacecraft that then reunites with the Apollo command vehicle in low Mun orbit. Speaking of that, the construction of the Apollo command vehicle is much quicker than the construction of the lander because it's a much more simple machine, right? We just got the that's the Poodle engine, but configured to look like the upper stage of the Ariane 5, I believe that engine variant is based on, and then just a fuel tank and the aforementioned Apollo style command pod. Now here I'm trying to encase it in a fairing, which was a little bit tricky because I haven't actually unlocked the 2.5 meter diameter fairing base. So I had to get a little bit creative with the 1.875 meter, I think that's the diameter piece, to kind of build a payload fairing for the upper stage of the rocket. And you just know, for the first stage core, I had to make it orange. It's got to be done. It's got to be done. And I added these, I guess, Atlas 5 style solid rocket boosters just to give us a bit more oomph at liftoff, because this is going to be a very, very important rocket for Lowne Aerospace. It's going to really solidify us as the main launch company on the planet. Literally, we are. So, very, very important launch. And, well, the rocket construction looks basically done. And we are off on only our second ever orbital mission for our space program in this playthrough. And weirdly, it's also 2 for 2 for orange first stage tanks. Although, now that we've unlocked auto struts, this rocket should hopefully be a little bit less wobbly than the last one. And we now have the gang all here. Bob Kerman is not going to be heading off into space on his own. We have a crack team of 3. Ace pilot Jebediah Kerman, the truly fearless leader of the Kerbonauts, genius scientist Bob Kerman, able to expertly run the experiments to give us the science we need, and Bill is here too. And I think we're definitely getting away from the early game rut where rockets are definitely built to compromise. This rocket almost looks like something you'd design in Sandbox with a fully unlocked parts list, but not quite. The main shortcoming is that really dumb looking interstage fairing, because I haven't unlocked the fairing with the same diameter base, I should say, as the first and second stage fuel tanks. But rest assured, unlocking that is priority numero uno once we've completed this mission. And to reiterate the rules of this playthrough, we're not going to be getting a great deal of science from the Mun because I'm limiting my missions to one landing per celestial body. No biome hopping or any other means of stretching the amount of science earned. The lab is also out of the question. One landing per place, with science experiments run only from that landing site. And while the craft is in space, of course, which, I guess is technically still in space when it's landed, but, let us not get bogged down in semantics here. We're certainly not getting bogged down by the atmosphere because, look, we now have an apoapsis of 80 kilometers, so well and truly above the atmospheric border of Kerbin. And now we've entered the vacuum space. I've staged the launch escape system that we no longer need. And of course, we can now ditch that horrifically ugly interstage fairing, revealing the Apollo-style capsule. I probably should have said earlier what I meant by Apollo-style in case anyone here is unfamiliar with the nomenclature. So in KSP, you generally have two kinds of landings. So the last mission we did to Minmus, that was what we would call a direct ascent mission, because basically you launch the spacecraft, the entire thing goes to the place you go in, the entire thing lands there, and then the entire thing goes back, potentially dropping stages along the way. Apollo style is different because it's like the American Apollo missions to the moon. So you have a lander capsule and a separate command pod. So the command pod generally will take the lander to orbit the place that you want to land on. The lander then separates and, as you might be able to figure out, lands there. And then once it's done everything it needs to do on the surface, it will then take off and then redock with the command ship that's kind of been left in orbit. That's the gist of things. This is obviously not a recreation of the actual Apollo missions, because although we have the Apollo-style command pod and the Apollo-style lander can that comes with the Making History DLC, the rest of the rocket, I guess it kind of looks a bit like the Apollo-style command pod at least, but not so much the lander. Again, the lander was kind of built as a bit of a compromise because I had to have the Science Junior. Well, I guess I didn't need the Science Junior, but I wanted to bring the Science Junior, which then didn't really give us many options when it came to the design. It's now disappeared off the screen, so this is a great moment to be talking about the looks of the lander. But I kind of used those flag pieces to kind of build a sort of a structural fuselage look. Some of the flags, the flag parts, you can set them to have actual physical thickness rather than just being thin as paper. So I've set them as the white panel. And I think it came out quite nicely. I don't think I've ever used flags in this method before, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. And here we are, getting our encounter with the Mun. Now, what I really should have done, in retrospect, was do try and make this a bit more true to Apollo. So although I've said this is not a recreation of the Apollo missions for hopefully obvious reasons, one thing the Apollo missions did do was a free return trajectory, such that if, they passed by the moon, and there was some sort of engine failure or something that left the spacecraft unable to fire its engines or thrusters or orient itself or whatever problem would have happened, it would have just flown past the moon and then returned to Earth safely without any kind of engine input from the spacecraft, hence free return trajectory. It would have freely returned to Earth. You can do this in Kerbal Space Program, just for whatever reason I did not. I guess I just forgot that was a thing Apollo did. What it didn't do was a little EVA upon entering the moon's sphere of influence, because why would they? Their science experiments don't work like the Kerbal Space Program experiments. So again, I've said this previously in this playthrough, but planets and moons, they have two kinds of space above them. So you have space close to the planet or moon and space high above the planet or moon, and you get different science for running the experiments in each place, or in this case each height. So around all of our science experiments, as soon as we enter the sphere of influence of the Mun, so we would be in space high above it, now we're in low Mun orbit, we can now run the science experiments once again. So there's the Science Junior and the Mystery Goo. running. We also have the barometer and the thermometer, and I believe that's it in terms of how many science experiments we actually have at the moment, if you don't count the EVA science experiment pack, which, as you can see, Bob Kerman is wearing on his back. He again does not have a parachute. We're going to be running that on the surface of the Mun. And but yeah, going after this mission, we'll unlock a few more science experiments. We can try and net a bit more science points on future missions in this playthrough. And yeah, if you are enjoying things so far, then don't forget to leave a little like on the video if you'd like to. But let us now get to the main part of the mission, which is, of course, doing the actual Mun landing. So we've got our lander here, all separated from the mothership. We've got 2 Kerbals on board, Jebediah Kerman, who's going to be piloting this thing, and Bob Kerman, who's going to be running all the science experiments once we get to the surface of the Mun. A little bit of a weird visual glitch with the landing lectures here. They didn't fully deploy, and then, just wait for it, they sort of then just pinged open. So I think maybe Time Warp might have messed with the deployment animation of the landing legs. Not quite sure. But now we're going to begin our burn. So we've got loads of Delta V in this lander. I very much underestimated the, I guess, the efficiency of the Spark upper stage engine and how much fuel that lander can actually contain. So I believe, you guys will have to rewind the video and check the time lapse, but I believe that I didn't actually add any extra fuel tanks to that lander can. The lander can piece has liquid fuel and oxidizer reserves just built into it, and I just attached an engine to that, and that was basically all I did. I did add an SAS wheel though, because the actual wheel authority of that command pod is very, very weak. So I think the intention is to use those RCS thrusters that are built in, but who's got time for that, eh? I just added a big old reaction wheel to make things a bit easier. Didn't really help with the landing though. As you can see, we've awkwardly perched on this rock for the duration of the time we're spending on the surface of the Mun. You'll see the lander slowly migrating to the left there, very, very slowly, but it didn't fall over, so that was all good. So now we've got Bob Kerman on EVA. I've got Bob Kerman in the blue, I think it's like an ESA inspired suit, just to differentiate him from whichever other Kerbal is coming with him. I'm going to try and at least have 2 Kerbals on every landing, just because just seems more fun that way. Oh, bit of a teeter there of the lander. Just seems more fun to have 2 Kerbals with us. So Bob Kerman is doing a little flyby, doing an inspection of the very precariously positioned lander, lighting up those old headlights there. And now we're going to perform our EVA science experiment, which again is going to be the old game of golf that we played on the surface of Minmus. Now, I actually knew this fact, but I neglected to mention it when I was doing the commentary for the Minmus mission for some reason, but people kind of brought it up in the comments for the separate kind of Minmus mission video, that the golf club experiment thing that I've just done is a reference to a real life event that happened on the Apollo missions. Hey, this is kind of like, it rhymes, eh? I think the top comment on my video is by, I wrote this down, I don't know how to say this name, Karagianis. There you go. If you know, you know. As mentioned that the golf experiment is a reference to astronaut Alan Shepard, who smuggled an improvised golf club and 2 balls onto Apollo 14 so he could play golf on the moon. I don't know if he ever actually got the record for like longest drive or longest golf hit or whatever. Makes sense, right? But, you know, modern drivers are very good. So I don't care to pause my commentary and research the matter further. But maybe Karagianis can leave another comment in the comment section below and enlighten us even further about the wonders of the Apollo program, such as the amazing lander cam, which we are now reboarding. We got the free IVA mod installed in case any of you are a bit confused as to why when I enter command pods it suddenly goes to first person. I have to sort of navigate the craft to find my seat. That's kind of why. I love free IVA mod. I've known about it for the longest time, but I just thought, well, it doesn't really add that much. Guys, it's like game changing. You should install free IVA if you haven't got it. It's brilliant. I love it. Great mod. Anyway, getting a bit sidetracked here. Look at all the science racking up on the left-hand side of our screen. Wow, okay, I thought it would go on a bit longer than that. But either way, we've got a lot of science. We've done I didn't talk about it when I did it, so maybe I should quickly recap. I ran all of our science experiments that are on the lander itself. We did the EVA Golf Club experiment. I took a surface sample from the Mun, and I did a crew report in the lander when it was touched down, and I did an EVA report when kind of on the surface of the Mun, and another EVA report just like using the jetpack, so it's kind of like flying just above the surface of the Mun. I believe Jebediah come and did the EVA report from the surface. Bob did it from the air. This above the ground, right? Seems ironic, right? You'd think it would be the other way around, given those two Kerbals' personalities. But regardless, we're now going to shut down our first stage Terrier engine and get ready to launch the second stage. And we are off once again. Jebediah Kerman and Bob Kerman rapidly heading back towards Low Mun orbit so they can be reunited with Bill Kerman, who's been there all on his own. Loneliest Kerbal in the space program so far, given that he was so far away from his home planet and, was obviously not with Jebediah and Bob Kerman. And we've got ComNet enabled, so just like Michael Collins in real life and all the other people that didn't go down to the surface of the moon on the Apollo program missions, when he was passing behind the Mun, so the far side of the Mun, he would have had no connection to the Kerbal Space Center, so he would have been well and truly on his own. Poor old Bill. So Jebediah Kerman and Bob Kerman give him a good firm handshake when they get back to the spacecraft. So I'm just playing around with prograde, retrograde, and normal and anti-normal on the nav board to kind of force our encounter. I could see the separation from the target put our spacecraft, so the lander spacecraft, was going to be ahead of the target command module. So what I did was I raised our apoapsis to be above the command module's orbit. We're in a higher orbit. A higher orbit is a slower orbit, so that allows the command pod to catch up to us, and by the time we get to our second encounter node now, we've got a very, very close separation. Really don't know why that was so difficult for me to say. Luckily, as I've said, this playthrough is not a tutorial. It's like the only time I've actually played through the science mode of Kerbal Space Program, not explicitly for a tutorial. The exception being the Stranded series. People say I abandoned that. I feel like that series just sort of ran its course, right? We landed on Eve. That's kind of like the final boss of Kerbal Space Program, and I don't know, people didn't really watch those videos. I think some of them have gained sort of retrospective, like, a success. So after a couple of years, the algorithm suddenly just started pushing one of them. The one I did with Martin C. to Pants to Eve, I think, did pretty well, as do most Eve rescue missions. But yeah, other than the Stranded, I believe this is kind of the first time I've done a proper playthrough of Kerbal Space Program Science Mode, not as a tutorial. This is an Apollo-style Mun landing. This is really difficult for a beginner, so hopefully no beginners are trying to follow through. And if you are a beginner and are following through and have managed to do all of this well, then my hat goes off to you. You should probably start a YouTube channel. Actually, don't start a YouTube channel because you're obviously much better at the game than I am. So don't do that. But you can carry on watching this video. How about that? So yeah, we've reunited our space frogs. I had to take the data from the lander can and store it onto the Apollo command pod because we're not going to be landing the lander can on Kerbin, right? It's going to get destroyed in the atmosphere. We do have the Delta V to deorbit ourselves, or put ourselves on a collision course with the surface of the Mun. Then we can ditch the lander can and then reorbit ourselves so we don't crash into the surface of the Mun. But I don't know, it's more fun to just take it back to Kerbin with us, and because the lander is attached via that docking port, it kind of expands the livable space on board the spacecraft, much like the real Apollo missions. I feel like I've done actual Apollo recreations before, and I haven't talked about the Apollo missions as much as having this video, which isn't even, it's not a tutorial and it's also not an Apollo recreation, but somehow I've managed to shoehorn in lots of similarities with the real Apollo missions. I guess it's always going to be inevitable, right? We're going to the moon and landing in the exact same fashion, and mission sequence, is that the right way of saying that, as the real Apollo missions. But now it must all come to an end. We've separated the fuel tanks and engine and power modules and all that of the command pod, and we've also separated the little lander. Oh, it's blowing up, it's exploded. All very sad as we re-enter the atmosphere. And yeah, that's why we had to take the science out of the command pod, the lander can, because obviously all that science would have just exploded right around now, or a few seconds ago, had we not done that. But the science is on board the command pod here, which is very much in one piece, so we'll be able to recover that science and get to spend it at the tech tree, unlock lots of new toys for future missions. And I'm not quite sure where to go on the next mission. I'm umming and ahhing a couple of things, either maybe building a small space station in low Kerbin orbit now that we've conquered our 2 natural satellites here? Or do I just go for like building a satellite network maybe to expand our communications reaches so we can get kind of further out, so when we do send missions to places like Joule and Eeloo, etc., we have a better chance of staying connected to the Kerbal Space Center? Or should I just go somewhere like, I don't know, I guess Duna is like the next logical destination to go to after Mun and Minmus, or we go somewhere else, like maybe somewhere really out there, like Eeloo or Lathe or somewhere. I guess I've got to have a sit down and have a think before building the next rocket. But now we can have a look at what toys we can unlock. So I decided to unlock Advanced Electrics, just so we can get the extendable solar panels, because they give us a slightly more reliable supply of electricity, and also they just look cooler than the static solar panels. From there, I then had a little meander around the tech tree and settled on the electronics tab, because this contains some more science experiments that we can run on missions, therefore getting us more science. We really want to be kind of prioritizing the nodes that contain science experiments. After that, I then splurged on advanced exploration, mostly for the deployable ladders. The lab would be very useful had I not set the arbitrary rule that I wasn't allowed to use it, because the lab can generate obscene amounts of science. And there, you know, we've only got 315.5 science points remaining, so we are dwindling a bit now. I had a little browse of the various nodes we've got available, and eventually I remembered that I wanted to unlock the 2.5 meter diameter fairing piece, so we don't have awkward fairings like we did for this mission just gone. So I unlocked the specialized construction node, and now the only node we can really unlock after that is aerodynamics, with the very limited amount of science we have remaining. And that's it. That's all the unlocking we're going to be doing at the end of our Mun mission. So hope you enjoyed things and are excited for the next mission we're going to do in Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. And the next logical step in conquering our solar system is Duna, analogue of Mars and its moon Ike. We'll need to build a rocket capable of flying 3 Kerbals to the Duna system, deploy a separate lander to land on both Duna and Ike, and then bring the crew, and more importantly, the precious science gathered, back to Kerbin. And that's exactly what I'm building in the vehicle assembly building in front of your very eyes. Well, so far I've just built the lander, which has enough fuel to land on the surface of Duna, return to orbit, and then land on the surface of Ike, making this not just our first interplanetary mission, but also the first mission that'll feature a landing on 2 different celestial bodies. I did use a bit of part clipping with the lower gold tanks. I did this purely to make the lander look better though. The tanks would work fine if they weren't clipped in and instead just protruded a bit further down at the bottom, but that just didn't look as good, you know? One of the bigger hurdles of designing this craft was the fact that we don't have the nuclear engine unlocked yet, meaning we'll have to use a much more inefficient chemical rocket engine. In this case, I went with the Cheetah for our interplanetary transfer and command vehicle. Like the Mun mission, I went for an Apollo-style setup, so we've got 3 Kerbals who will spend most of the mission in the command pod of the main ship, with 2 of them commanding the lander to conduct the 2 landings of the mission. But as you can see, the rocket's construction is basically done, so now we need to time warp to a Kerbin to Duna transfer window.
If you don't line from Kerbin to the sun to Duna, the angle the line forms at, the sun should be 45 degrees. Oh.
And Jebediah, Bill Kerman and Bob Kerman are all airborne together for the second time for this playthrough of Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one, as we begin our ascent. Now, I don't think my gravity turn was quite as aggressive as it probably should have been. We're tipping over a little bit too slowly. I was trying to use the, if you look at the roll, yaw and pitch things on the bottom left of the screen, you can see the little slider gauges are blue. That's because I pressed caps lock, so I have fine control. So WASD have a lot less of an input, if that makes sense. It's designed for sort of fine aircraft control. But I like it because by default, the actual gimbal of the mainsail engines, which are powering the first 3 stages, or I guess, you know, the 2 side boosters are now detached. I don't really like how, like, the gimbal looks. Like, it's very snappy and video gamey. I know it's a video game, right? But I don't know. I think it just looks better having the fine control, so you can't visibly see the engine gimbaling as much. And when you do see it gimbal, it's kind of a smooth, realistic look. But I'm not really used to flying like that, and so the gravity turn wasn't the best. But regardless, we made it to space all okay. So not really much else to comment on there. We had crossfeed enabled on this thing, so basically the two side cores would feed into the central core, not draining any fuel from the central core, so that when the two side boosters detached, we still had a fully fueled rocket to continue the mission. Which has never really been done in real life. I know things like the Space Shuttle are a thing, but for things like Delta Heavy and Falcon Heavy and any other kind of triple core rocket, that's never been done. It's been attempted. SpaceX set out to have the Falcon Heavy adopt a similar fuel like feeding system, but it was just like too technologically difficult to do. So yeah, a little tidbit of the rocket's design there that I probably should have mentioned in the vehicle assembly building, although the build was over fairly quickly, wasn't it? I feel like it's a fairly simple craft altogether, right? I mean, the lander is kind of the most tricky thing to build. The rest is just basically one giant fuel tank. Had to have a triple core setup because, of course, we've only got 2.5 meter diameter parts at this stage. We haven't got the big heavy stuff that we'll get later on in the tech tree. So that's kind of one of the nice things about science mode. It kind of forces me to do things I might not necessarily otherwise do, like use a triple core setup instead of a big 5 meter Saturn V style rocket. And things like the Cheetah engine I hardly ever use because the nuclear engine is just better and the Wolfhound engine is better generally. But here I'm kind of having to have my hand forced a little bit, and it's making me having to come up with like creative decisions. Gets the old brain cooking sometimes, maybe, I guess. So yeah, it's kind of a fun. I feel like as I was saying those words out loud, they sounded like negatives, right? Because no one wants to be forced to do anything right. Hill that I will always die on is I hate Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's weapon breaking system. It made the game completely unplayable to me. I never completed Breath of the Wild, and I didn't even play Tears of the Kingdom. My partner played Tears of the Kingdom, and I was watching her play it, and I was like, nah, I can't do this again. And yeah, the arguments in favor of that weapon breaking system was always, oh yeah, but you know, it forces you to use different weapons and change up your style and things. And I'm like, I don't want to be forced to. I want to use the sword. I want to use the Master Sword. I am Zelda. But then I've just made the same argument for science mode in Kerbal Space Program. So make that make sense. I feel like it's slightly different, right? Because, you know, a sword shouldn't break after being, like, hitting something 3 times. Whereas the engines all work in KSP. I don't know. I guess I just don't really like weapon breaking systems. Kind of was annoying in Animal Crossing as well. What am I even talking about? I'm not even talking about anything that's going on in this video. And we've now done the maneuver to Duna. I mean, this playthrough is not a tutorial playthrough, as I've said several times throughout the playthrough. So you get little tangents like that, I guess. It's just something to just be expected. There's like a link in the description to Lowne Aerospace 2, which was an actual tutorial series for beginners, or maybe not super duper beginners. Like, it didn't go into like the absolute basics of gravity turns and stuff like that. I did try and do that for Lowne Aerospace 3. So the original Lowne Aerospace 3 was in Kerbal Space Program 2. That relic of a game, and I put so much effort into that tutorial series. Like, I put diagrams up explaining what gravity turns were and how to do them. I was so proud of that, and then obviously it was all for naught in the end. And the kind of beginner tutorial scene on YouTube for KSP1 is already so oversaturated, I didn't feel like there was any need for me to make my own absolute beginner's tutorial for KSP1. And that's the end of my story. I'm going to talk about what's happening on screen now. So we have new science experiments. Well, we have one new science experiment. We have the magnetometer boom. So I'm running that in interplanetary space, as well as all of our other science kit. I guess except the seismometer, because that only works when landed somewhere. Because this is the first time we've been into deep interplanetary space. We get a few little extra science points on the way to Duna. I did forget to run the magnetometer experiment whilst we were in space above Kerbin, so I'll have to do that on the way back from Duna, but obviously we're still on the way at this stage, so I'm just making our mid-course correction burns that are, so our current trajectory is taking us within Duna's sphere of influence. We kind of want to be, you know, close up to Duna, right? So we're doing is that a normal burn or an anti-normal burn? The previous screen's too small for me to make out. Looks like a normal burn. I feel like I ought to just know at this stage. I've been doing this for this many years. I feel like the muscle memory, I should just know which direction the spaceship has to burn on a mid-course correction point to Duna, but I guess, what are you going to do, eh? So I decided that air braking is for noobs, of course, we all know this. So I'm going to be capturing it to Duna, doing a retrograde burn rather than using any of its atmosphere to slow ourselves down. If you're trying to recreate my kind of journey playing science mode and you're kind of struggling for fuel, then you could always aerobrake, although you got to be mindful that the solar panels I've got on board this thing are non-retractable. Well, I should say that the solar panels on the lander are retractable, but not the ones on the mothership, so you kind of... We can't aerobrake in this case, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So we've done our first initial capture, now we're plotting a maneuver node for our second burn that's going to circularize us in low Duna orbit. I wanted to get into an eccentric orbit first though, so aha! We could run our science experiments in space high above Duna. So just like Kerbin, there are kind of two spaces above the planet. So there's space near to Duna and space high above Duna. So that's what I'm quickly doing here. Doing crew report, EVA report, all of those science experiments, including the magnetometer boom. And here I am actually just deploying the little Communitron. It turns out I still don't quite know how the antennas work in Kerbal Space Program. My thought was that the mothership has a really powerful antenna. It's got a relay antenna and just a communication antenna on board, so it can connect to the Kerbal Space Center. My hope was by having a small antenna on the lander. That antenna hasn't got the range to reach the KSC, but it will have the range to reach the mothership. So I was hoping it could kind of like ping to the mothership, and then the mothership could act as a relay to get to the KSC, but it didn't work. The reason for this is because the mothership has two antennas, right? It's got a communications antenna, which is really powerful, and a relay antenna, which is not very powerful. I don't think I've got a very powerful relay antenna unlocked currently in the tech tree at this stage in our playthrough. So my hope was maybe we could sort of cheese the game, and the game would just see, oh, we can connect to the KSC with our communications antenna, and oh, we have a positive check for do we have a relay on board, therefore we could just sort of connect to the mothership and then connect to the KSC. That was my thought anyway. It didn't work. So when we kind of detach the lander, we won't have a connection to the Kerbal Space Center. But I'm just going to go ahead and say that in my headcanon, we do. Because we have an aerial that should be able to connect to the mothership. And then, you know, Bob, or Bill even I should say, on board the mothership can then talk to us on the surface and talk to the KSC about our whereabouts and all that. So this kind of should work, it just doesn't. So I guess for kind of our future missions that we're doing to farther flung places, either I'll need to put a more powerful communications dish on the lander itself. That's if I do another kind of mission where I do a separate lander and a separate mothership, which I think I will, because they're just kind of more fun and interesting missions to do in my humble opinion. We'll either have to put a more powerful communications dish on the lander, or put a more powerful relay dish on the mothership. So that was a really long story, wasn't it? I hope that all made sense. I'm not going to pause and check. We're just going to carry on as we make our descent into Duna's atmosphere. So we've got Bob Kerman and Jebediah coming on board. We have a lot of Delta V. We've got 2.5 kilometers per second, in fact, slightly more than that in total, which is way more than you need for Duna. For Duna, it's almost free to land because we can just use parachutes. The atmosphere on Duna is a lot more tenuous than Kerman, though, so parachutes aren't going to be able to stop us completely. We'll have to do a small engine burn to come to a safe touchdown speed. And then, getting back to Duna orbit, it's, I guess it takes a fair amount of fuel, but not the amount of fuel we have on board. But as I said earlier in the build time-lapse, we are going to be doing a landing on Ike after this. So that's why we've got way more fuel than we need in the lander. And if you guys wanted to do this mission yourself, you could actually optimize things a bit more and refuel the lander at the mothership rather than just having all of its fuel on board, and do like multiple landings on Duna so you can collect more science by visiting different biomes. I've set the arbitrary challenge for this playthrough of I can only do one landing per planet or moon, just so that we're having to vary up the destinations we're going to. So that's something you could do, or you could just forget about Ike and just do like hops around Duna and maximize your science that way, I guess. Anyway, speaking of science, we've run all the experiments, so now Bob Kerman's going to go out on EVA and collect the data. I did make a small mistake, though, so we're currently playing as Bob Kerman, but now we switched to the lander so we can run all of the experiments, and then I tried to collect the data without switching back to Bob Kerman. I was just blindly clicking without really reading what I was doing, and realized I just reset the Science Junior and Mystery Guru in the process of doing all of that. So then I switched to Bob and had to quickly run the experiments again from EVA. So in case you're wondering why I did that, I didn't mean to. It was just a mistake. Again, this is not a tutorial, so I am absolved from any sins. I think, if you could call that a sin, I'm not sure. Anyway, we've now kind of done the trivial thing of, doing science and research on the surface of Duna. Now it's time to do the most important thing, which is, of course, planting our flag. And just mentioned the mistake I made earlier in that I kind of did all the science wrong. I also made a bit of a blunder. I forgot to bring an EVA science kit with us, so Bob Kerman can't hit his golf club. I was genuinely really annoyed, but I didn't have time to then revert to Spaceplane Hangar, or revert to vehicle assembly building, I should say, and equip Bob with a science pack. So that was a bit of a downer. I'm gonna have to put like a post-it note or something on my monitor saying, don't forget to bring an EVA science kit next mission, because I really like doing this EVA science kits, and they do give you a pretty generous amount of science, to be honest, for like how easy they are to incorporate into a lander. Like, unlike the physical science parts, you can just drop them into the cargo hold of the command pod, or just stick it to a Kerbal. Like, the Kerbals don't need to have their parachutes with them, unless you forget to add parachutes to your return vehicle, and then you need to EVA them out before you crash into the surface of Kerbin, but hopefully that won't happen to us. So yeah, they're dead easy to carry around. You get like loads of science. So I'm a bit disappointed that I forgot to bring that in this mission's case. Yes, we're going to speed the footage up a little bit now to get Bob Kerman back on board the lander. There we go. And oh yeah, I think I did like I did 2 crew reports by mistake. So yeah, that's why I had to dump that experiment. And then we can just time warp around to a point at which we can take off and rendezvous with Bill. Yeah, Bill. I always get Bill and Bob mixed up. Bill Kerman in low Duna orbit. So, going to retract our solar panels and retract the ladder as well. I don't think retracting the ladder makes a huge difference. I'm not sure if the ladders have like higher drag when they're deployed, but it would make sense, right? We also retract the landing gear as well, and then just press on to orbit. So yeah, like I say, Duna's atmosphere is very thin. So even something like the Terrier engine, which is optimized to work in a vacuum, no problems lifting up this relatively heavy lander from the surface of the red planet. As we get a lovely little view of it. And the nice thing about these kind of single stage vehicles for atmospheric flight is you can kind of see how the engine plume changes as we ascend. So it starts out very narrow and tight as we're kind of close to sea level, and as we get towards the thinnest parts of the atmosphere, it'll spread out, be a bit more ballooned out because of the lower pressures. Although I did just say that Juno has a very thin atmosphere, so I'm not sure how visually clear that will be in this particular instance. But yeah, actually looking at it, our altitude is quite high, and it's the plume doesn't really look any different, does it? But maybe that's something you could just look forward to next time you watch me ascend from Kerbin. Pay attention to the little plume of the engine bell, and then the plume of the engine exhaust, you can see it expands as we ascend through the atmosphere, because there's less atmospheric pressure and all that. And that's why real life engines, the sea level engines, they have smaller engine bells than the upper stage vacuum optimized engines. Classic example would be the SpaceX Raptor versus the SpaceX Vacuum Raptor. Huge engine bell on the Vacuum Raptor, even though it's like the same engine. Basically, very, very brief, unscientific summary of why that is. You kind of want the air pressure inside the engine bell to be the same, or as close as possible to the pressure outside of the engine bell. So at sea level, obviously, pressure is quite high. So you have a small engine bell to keep the pressure inside the engine bell at a high level. And then obviously in the vacuum space, the pressure is, well, it's 0. So you kind of want the pressure inside the engine bell to be as low as possible. So you have a nice big engine bell so that, the pressure is low. And there you go. That's a bit of science for you there. So as you can see, we're more or less in a circular Duna orbit at this stage. The atmospheric border on Duna is 50 kilometers. So our apoapsis is at 55. Our periapsis, well, it was in the 40s when I started this sentence, but now it too is above the 50 kilometer mark, keeping our orbit fairly low at this stage because our target vessel is ahead of us. So we're trying to stay in a lower orbit than the target because lower orbits are faster than higher orbits. So by keeping our orbit nice and low, we could catch up. There it is, about 7 kilometers away, but then doing a lazy old burn towards target. This is really inefficient, but I knew I had enough fuel to just do this lazy way of getting to the target. Just burn towards it, then kill all of our speed, burning retrograde relative to the target, then burning towards it again. We can sort of like lazily get back to the mothership. So there it is, coming into view. Bill Kerman is finally united once again with his fellow space frogs. In the last mission to the Mun, he was the loneliest Kerbal in the world, in the solar system really, because he was on the far side of the Mun. No communication to the KSC, no communication to the lander either. He was truly all on his own. And that's even more so this time. He was in a completely different planetary system with no communication with the outside world. But he's about to make some friends. Well, make some friends, be reunited with his friends once again, or colleagues. I don't really know what the personal workplace relationships are like in Kerbin land, but they're all smiling, so I guess they're all happy to be there. Although Jebediah Kerman and Bob Kerman aren't rushing on board, right? They're just staying on board the lander. So I'm not like transferring them between the vehicles because like in my head, in real life, they would just be like floating freely between the two vehicles. A bit like, you guys see the film Apollo 13 when you're watching Tom Hanks floating freely around between the lunar lander and the Apollo command module. It's like that here, right? We've got the Apollo style command module and the lander can. They can move between it. It's like a bit more habitable space for the long old journey to Duna. 332 days so far this mission's been going on. So it's a long old time to be sitting in that cramped little, command pod. And I guess it's kind of cruel, right? Because the lander can habitable space is also quite small. So yeah, the Kerbals, I guess they're just made of stronger stuff than you and I suppose. I could certainly never endure that amount of time in that smaller space. But Kerbals, as we know, they love space and can stay in space even when there is not much space in their spaceships. So there we are. So through that terrible story, we've now plotted a maneuver that's going to take us to Ike, and we're going to circularize and go and do a landing on Ike. Won't that be lots of fun? So obviously Ike is its own thing, right? So we can get science from space high above Ike and space from near to Ike, just like we did for Duna, Kerbin, Mun, and Minmus so far in this playthrough. And so yeah, you don't get that much science from space. You get most science from landing somewhere, but every little helps. We're trying to unlock the tech tree here. So yeah, that's that. Yeah, it's kind of another reason I'm annoyed that I forgot to bring any EVA science kits, because of course in this mission we're doing 2 landings, and so we could have done 2 EVA experiments, with the Kerbals. We could have got loads more science. So yeah, it's kind of disappointing, because I really do like the EVA science kits. I believe they were added with the Breaking Ground DLC release. I could be wrong, but I'm 99% sure that's when they were added. So yeah, and there is Ike appearing below us. Now you can't really see it yet, but there are some very interesting geological features on the surface of Ike, and that is because I am not playing fully stock KSP, as you've probably been able to deduce during this very long video. Just running visual mods, no parts mods, just visual mods. And one of those visual mods is Parallax Continued, and that's why the surface of Ike, and indeed Duna, Mun, Minmus, and Kerbin, and all the other places we're going to be going, they look so much better than in stock KSP. And in the case of Ike, Parallax Continued not only beautifies the kind of surface and appearance of Ike, it also adds some really, really interesting geological features. They're like big red geodes or mineral formations or stalagmites. I'm not really sure. I'm no geologist or rocket scientist, so I don't actually know what it is. If it's based on a real phenomenon that happens either on Earth or in the solar system / universe that we live in, or if it's just kind of a creative thing that the mod maker made and it's not based on anything scientific. Either way, I'm sure someone in the comments can let me know. But either way, you're about to see these things appear. There they are. There's kind of red shards sticking out of the surface of Ike. Looks very striking. I wonder if Lynx, who obviously made Parallax, went with red because this is the moon of the red planet, or if this is based on an actual chemical thing and it's red. I don't know. Like I say, this isn't a tutorial, nor is it a scientific educational video, I guess. But as you can see, touchdown is coming along very, very nicely. Now, the stay on the surface of Ike is going to be very brief, and that's just because I had to do this twice. The first time I did it, I kind of got the Kerbals out on EVA, planted the flag, did all the science, did everything, and had a fun old time. And then I got into the lander, and then the lander just fell through the ground and exploded. And I hadn't made a quick save, so then I had to do the whole thing again, which is what you're watching now. But I was kind of pressed for time, and I didn't want to risk the explosion happening again, so I made a quick save on landing. And I just basically got Bob Kerman out on EVA, did the science experiments, gathered the surface sample, etc., and planted the flag, and then just got straight back on the lander. Jebediah Kerman just held the fort. He didn't get out on EVA as well. So that's why I feel like I regret it in hindsight, because it is nice having both Kerbals out on EVA for the photo opportunity, and for me, as a creator, a thumbnail shot opportunity. Although in this mega compilation video, there are loads more opportunities I could get photos, because we're landing on so many places in this massive, gigantic video. But, I guess it's nice to have options, and for you guys to see the Kerbals out on EVA looking all happy. But look at all that science! appearing on the top left of the screen, all of the data that we've gathered. We've actually done basically the lion's share of the science gathering at this point in the mission. The only thing left to do is run the magnetometer experiment in Kerbin's sphere of influence, so in space high above Kerbin and space low to Kerbin, and I believe that's then it for science gathering for this mission. So actually, now that we're going back to the mothership is the vehicle that has the magnetometer boom on it, not the lander. So we don't actually need to have the lander going forward. We can just ditch it or leave it in Ike orbit, or deorbit it first so it crashes into the surface of Ike and doesn't leave any clutter in space. But I thought I'd bring it back to Kerbin with us just because we have the Delta V in the mothership required. And again, it's nice to have that kind of extra habitable space for our astronauts. Just makes things a bit more realistic and believable, even though it is still a very, very unethically small space to live in for the duration of the mission. So yeah, but here we are. You see, rendezvous was fairly trivial. It's much easier to get a rendezvous very quickly on planets and moons without an atmosphere, because you can just do the gravity turn much quicker and it's much more predictable, at least for me. So your mileage might vary. But there we are. We have a rendezvous. So now we're just going to do the quick Lowne lazy method of docking. So switch to both vessels, set each other as the targets, and then use auto SAS to hold the targets. And as you can see, they just align themselves beautifully. And I can just use RCS to make sure the docking ports are aligned. You can tell they're aligned because the prograde vector on the nav ball is superimposed over the target vector. It wasn't quite at the end there, so I made a minor adjustment just before impact or docking. So yeah, that was the docking sequence done. Now, for realism's sake, I'm not going to pump any fuel from the lander into the mothership because there's no obvious way in which that could logistically happen. I guess there could be like a micro fuel line that moves it very slowly. Again, it's going to be a long old way back to Kerbin, so we don't need the fuel very quickly, but I don't know, it just felt like from a realism standpoint it would be better to like just leave the fuel on the lander. And then we time warped around so Ike is on the opposite side of Duna, so that when we do an escape burn, our periapsis around the sun will be below Duna's orbit, because of course we're going back to Kerbin, right, which is in a lower orbit around the sun compared to Duna. As you can see, we are not at a Kerbin to Duna. Oh, sorry, I misspoke. We're not at a Duna to Kerbin transfer window, but I don't care. I'm just going to create a burn that gets us on an intersect with Kerbin's orbit, and then we'll do a burn just just after our sun periapsis, and we can force those grey encounter nodes to swing together. But here you go. I think I'm making a move node just to test if this is going to happen, and as you can see, yeah, a small prograde burn is going to get us on a course that intersects Kerbin's sphere of influence, and we can get home nice and safely, and it's all within budget. You know, we've got over a kilometer per second of Delta V remaining in the vehicle, and you know, even if that wasn't enough, we could just ditch the lander and save some weight, and therefore gain some extra Delta V if we needed it, but we didn't, so it was all fine in the end. So yeah, now we're just going to go ahead and time warp round to that maneuver node that I just plotted, and as you'll see, it wasn't the most accurate because we're not actually going to get a Kerbin encounter when we do this burn. You'll see what I mean in just a second when the burn's done. So yeah, we'll close the maneuver node off just for the final stage of the burn, just so I can eyeball it myself. As you see, those grey nodes get really, really close, and then no encounter. But as you can see, if you really squint, you can see our periapsis is actually higher than Kerbin's orbital height, so I figured, well, we'll just time warp to apoapsis and do a small retrograde burn to lower our periapsis, and Robert, your father's brother, we have an encounter with Kerbin. Not a great encounter, but an encounter nonetheless. As you see, we're going to have to do a small inclination change so that we're actually intersecting Kerbin's atmosphere. And that's what we need to do. We just need to hit its atmosphere because, of course, we're not going to be needing to do circularization or anything like that because we just want to be landing. So we can use our ablative heat shields to do all the deceleration and, you know, slow ourselves down sufficiently, and then use parachutes to perform our final touchdown. I mean, you guys have seen missions done by me at this point, so you kind of know how this works. I'm just kind of talk about things whilst not a lot's happening on screen, or at least not a lot's happening on screen that I haven't already talked about prior to me executing it. And there we are. The burn is done. That periapsis is very low, though, or very high, I should say. So I'm going to just play around with RCS. So we enable RCS by pressing R on the keyboard, and then use I, J, K, and L, and H and N, similarly to WASD and Shift and Control for normal engine controls. And we can just kind of force the periapsis to be a good height. So I can't remember what it was. I think it was like 22 kilometers, I think. Fairly safe height because the heat shields in this game are extremely overpowered, especially the ablative ones. The inflatable heat shield is a bit more vulnerable to extreme heating, but it's still very, very good for what it is. And the ablative heat shields, they may as well not even be ablative, right? They're so crazy powerful. I don't think I've ever actually fully burned through an ablative heat shield. Probably there's been like a fringe case where I came in at a super duper eccentric trajectory compared to where I was re-entering Kerbin, I'm assuming, but I don't recall that ever happening. So yeah, there you go. You can see I'm just running the magnetometer experiment. Also, very important to remember to take the data from the lander and store it on the command pod, because unlike in KSP2, the game KSP1 doesn't do that by default. So if we just detached the lander and obviously detached the command pod from the lower ship, we would get none of the science that we've worked so hard to get, because it's all stored on board the lander. That's why when I transferred Jebediah and Bob back onto the mothership, I had to have one of them do an EVA rather than just a direct transfer through the docking ports, because we need to go on EVA so that we could take the data from the lander can. And here we are, re-entering at very high speed. So we'll be fine because we've got the ablative heat shield, but the same cannot be said for our poor little lander and the remains of the mothership, which are exploding in a catastrophic manner as we re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere. And yeah, with that beautiful mod. The mod that's creating those re-entry effects is called Firefly, by the way. Cannot recommend it enough. Full visual mod list is in the description of the video as well if you want to check that out. Ooh, another little visual mod just reared its head just there. We had a little lightning flash. That's from BlackRack's Volumetric Clouds mod. And there we are. We have our parachutes have deployed. Coming down a little bit fast, but survivable. We can slow our speed down a little bit by detaching our heat shield, and I always like the fact that the heat shields explode, even though that it's just a big chunk of ablative material, right? There's no combustibles on board. And there we are, touchdown in the highlands of Kerbin. I guess we could go on EVA and take a surface sample and do all that, but such a negligible amount of science, because now we're earning the big points. As you can see, in the R&D building, we have 5,294 science points to play with. So I kind of just started blindly unlocking stuff, to be honest. So advanced fuel system is good because we have the big orange tank. I figured the nuclear engine will be a very good engine to go for, because we're going to be going further than Duna for our next flight, and so it'd be nice to have the efficient engine. Then we unlocked some of the aviation stuff, just because I like those parts. And really, these nodes are all really cheap. 160 science points. Very, very low now compared to the amount of science that we have to work with. So this kind of middle point of the tech tree, we can just unlock everything at this stage. It doesn't really matter which ones we go for, because now we're just working towards the really expensive stuff. So I was kind of thinking about which expensive stuff to go for. Do we go for kind of the advanced science tech to get the advanced science experiments to get us more science points? Or do we go for kind of high power electrics, because that is going to be very helpful when we go very, very far afield. Once you're talking about things like Joule missions and Eeloo missions, solar panels are rubbish. And so it's nice to have RTGs. Although that being said, the nuclear engines have alternators on board, so we would still have means of generating power if we didn't have RTGs available to us. So yeah, that was just some food for thought. I did think very heavy rocketry would be worth the spend, because then we get the Mammoth engine and the Rhino engine and the Vector. I forgot how far down the Vector engine is actually on the tech tree. I mean, it is objectively one of the best engines in the game, so I understand why it's so far down, but yeah, I just forgot. So as you can see, we've spent quite a lot of our science so far. I'm also getting kind of bored watching me play through the game at real-time speed, so I'm going to speed it all up now so you can just see how I spent the remainder of our science points. So yeah, I spent a long time clicking various nodes, pondering what I wanted, see what was available, and in the end, I just unlocked all this stuff. I decided to go for the experimental electrics tab, so very, very expensive, but we get the RTG, so that's going to be helpful, because for our next mission, we're going to be heading to the furthest celestial object in the entire game, Eeloo, in-game equivalent of Pluto. Like the last couple of missions, we're doing things Apollo style, with a lander fitted out with all the science kit we've unlocked so far that can actually be used on Eeloo, that is, and that's what I'm currently building in the on-screen time-lapse right now. I briefly considered including a deployable rover for this mission, but I changed my mind when I realised that we only have the really rubbish tiny rover wheels, so that can be something we consider for next time when we've unlocked better wheels. As for the ship itself, I'm going with a slightly more luxurious vessel for Jeb, Bill and Bob, because this mission will have a much longer duration than our previous trips to Minmus, Mun, Duna and Ike. So while completely unnecessary, I added a large 4-seat crew module to supplement the living space provided by the lander capsule and main command pod, and I also added 3 private rooms for the Kerbals. And to avoid them developing muscle atrophy or glaucoma or any of the other issues that long-term microgravity environments can cause, I stuck each of the 3 bedrooms on the arms of a spinning gravity ring. The idea being that they'll sleep in the rooms at the very least, so a lot of hours of the day, or hypothetical day in this case, are spent in the gravity ring. And I'm also just going to pretend there's cryogenic stasis pods in each of the 3 rooms, so during the very long periods of deep space cruising, the Kerbals won't be aware of the passage of time while being blissfully unaware in stasis. I'll add some custom flags to the pod exteriors later to kind of help sell this idea. As for the rest of the craft, we're using liquid fuel only for the space vehicle, and it's going to be powered by 4 nuclear engines. That's right, Lowne Aerospace 3 has finally entered the nuclear age, after being dependent on chemical rockets up until now, as we were only able to unlock the hyper-efficient nuclear engine after returning from Duna. But looking at the screen, it looks like the spacecraft itself is pretty much done. So now we're going to just package it all up with some struts, not forgetting to add an RTG and some batteries, of course. I added some large solar panels as well, mostly for kind of just aesthetic reasons, really. It just makes the spacecraft look a lot cooler. Eeloo is so far away from the sun that, solar panels are not very effective out there. Solar power is approximately 4% at Eeloo periapsis and 1.4% at Eeloo apoapsis of the values seen at Kerbin, according to the KSP wiki. But now that the payload, I guess, is all packaged up, we can just build the rest of the rocket. And we're going to make use of the brand new 3.75 meter parts. Well, I should say brand new to us, 3.75 meter parts, supplemented by these 2 twin bore side boosters. I feel like I very rarely use the twin bore engines. This is quite exciting for me. And then we're going to select our Kerbals and make sure that all of them have an EVA science pack so that we can run EVA science, I guess, while on the mission. Now we can go to the map screen and time warp to a Kerbin to Eeloo transfer window. So again, I'm just eyeballing it. So a Kerbin to, and I overshot the first time. The optimal Kerbin to Eeloo transfer window is where Eeloo is 101 degrees ahead of Kerbin. If you draw a line from Kerbin to the sun to Eeloo, the angle that line forms at the sun is 101 degrees. I think I kind of time warped a bit too far, to be honest, but whatever, it was fine. Okay, so here we are on the launch pad, ready to launch. And we are off, launching on what's probably actually one of our last launches for this playthrough, because we're very close to completing the tech tree, and by the end of this mission we're going to be even closer than we are now, obviously, because that's the whole point of this mission. I have thought about kind of where to go for the next flight, and I'm thinking maybe not going somewhere and earning science, but rather building up some sort of orbital infrastructure, like a deep space relay network, or even a space station, or maybe even both, who knows, feeling wild there. Only because I thought about doing that for this mission rather than going to Eeloo after doing Duna and Ike, but we didn't have any of like the big relay dishes and like the Mark II cockpits and stuff that would be quite good for a space station. And so I thought, let's just get a bit more science, unlock some more space station-y things and, communication network things, and then we can kind of do that. So you can expect that for the next mission of this playthrough. But right now, we are going to Eeloo, as I've already mentioned several times at this point. But here we are, we've just finished our stage 1 burns, which are going to point prograde so we can separate, and there's no like engine clipping with that interstage fairing. And there we are, firing up the Rhino engine upper stage as we continue on our way to space. We're not going to reach orbit with this stage. We're going to kind of end up on a suborbital trajectory, but with like a long cruise to apoapsis to give us enough time to, stage that lower engine stage, reconfigure the ship Apollo style, and then, circularize with the power of the nuclear engine. So yes, very exciting that we finally have the nuclear engines available. Ooh, just deploying the fairing pieces for the launch escape system and the cockpit, and then the main payload, and there you are. So again, yes, we're doing like an Apollo style configuration, so not just the fact that we have a separate mothership and a separate lander, but also kind of doing this where we launch with the lander underneath the command pod, and then, do this whole reconfiguration maneuver once we're in space. So yeah, we've got an apoapsis of 81 kilometers, so we're kind of far away, so we've got enough time to do this reconfiguration maneuver and point ourselves prograde, ready to do our circularization burn. Ready, we're about to boop that lander. There we are. You might notice there's a Stay Putnik probe core on board the lander. I can't remember why I put that there, because we don't need it for any part of this mission. I think I added it just in case I wanted to be able to remotely control the lander, but we never needed to do that. And I should probably mention, don't Jebediah Kerman, Bill Kerman, and Bob Kerman look absolutely dashing? Their portraits have just disappeared. Hang on. There we are. I'm using the Breaking Ground DLC spacesuits. I've noticed in the past that whenever I use these suits, people always ask what mod it is, so I'm just going to get out of the way and make sure I talk about it before I forget to talk about it. It's not a mod, those spacesuits. They're part of the Breaking Ground DLC. They're very nice. They're kind of like look all futuristic-y, I guess. Okay, so now we're going to plot our course to Eeloo. So Eeloo's at kind of this inclined orbit, so we can't get an encounter from it, at least in this part of its orbit, if that makes sense. We can't get an encounter with it straight from Kerman. We're going to have to do a mid-course correction burn. And as I mentioned, we are using the nuclear engines, which are brilliant because they're very, very efficient, but not so brilliant in that they have very, very poor thrust-to-weight ratio. That's why I've got 4 of them. But, you know, even with 4, look at the size of the craft, right? It's going to be some long old burns here. So we're doing 2 burns to raise our apoapsis around the sun. We're going to do 1 burn that gets us just to the edge of Kerbin's sphere of influence. Then we'll do another burn that actually gets our orbit, you know, to kind of be to raise our apoapsis to around Eeloo's orbital height, if that makes sense. I'm worried I'm going to be struggling commentating over this mission because I'm in the UK right now. We have a heat wave, and but basically the long and short of it, my office right now is 35 degrees Celsius. And I can't have I've got like a little air conditioning unit. I can't turn it on though because it's really noisy and then it will like ruin the commentary. So apologies if I just like end up flagging a bit. You know, I'm going to take regular breaks with a cold glass of water and hopefully we'll make it through together. So here we are. Yes, I'm just plotting that aforementioned mid-course correction burn. I've now deleted it because it was plotted on our, you know, predicted orbit rather than our actual orbit, which we'll achieve during this second burn. So yeah, that's why that is. And look at that, we've deployed the little gravity. It's not really a gravity ring, is it? You know, the gravity, I mean, it consists of 3 arms and 3 pods, right? So how about gravity triskelion? Or gravity triangle is probably an easier word to remember there. But yeah, it's kind of satisfying watching it spin up at such high speeds during the time-lapse sections of this mission. Unfortunately, it doesn't, you know, accurately simulate Kerbin's gravity like I would like it to, as in it doesn't simulate 1G, because unfortunately the rotors in KSP, the lowest RPM value you can set them to is 5 rotations per minute, which is too fast. The gravity is too high. So ideally, we'd like to be able to, well, I don't know the calculations because I didn't bother doing them because I knew we wouldn't be able to get accurate 1G because we can't set the speed to be low enough. But if we could, yeah, we can calculate what size the gravity ring should be and figure out what RPM we would need. Regardless, we can't do any of that because, as I mentioned, it doesn't go slow enough in this game. But I guess, you know, it's better than nothing, right? As they are going to be in a gravity environment, so, you know, they are going to, hopefully their muscles won't atrophy or anything like that. And look at this! We are doing an EVA science experiment. Some people in the comments let me know that you can do the EVA science experiments whilst in space. You don't have to be on the surface of a planet or moon. So yeah, doing it here. And isn't that cool? That's a real scientific phenomenon, by the way. The thing that Bill Kerman just did, I mean. It's called the Janibikov effect. It's also known as the intermediate axis theorem or tennis racket theorem. When you spin a rigid object like a T-shaped tool, or in, you know, this case, an oversized wing nut in microgravity around its intermediate axis of rotation, it can like unexpectedly flip or tumble periodically, even though no external torque is applied. It was quite famously demonstrated by cosmonaut Vladimir Janibikov while flipping a wing nut inside a space station. It flipped 180 degrees at regular intervals, even though it was spinning freely in microgravity. So there you are. That's what that is a reference to. And I was waffling on so long that we've done it again, this time with Jebediah Kerman. Because I've never done the EVA science experiments before while in space. I've only ever done it on the surface of the Mun and Minmus. So we had to do it, you know, in space, near to Kerbin, space high above Kerbin, and now interplanetary space. Actually, that being said, I think I forgot to do it in space near to Kerbin, so whoops! I mean, at this point, the science gain from doing stuff, you know, on Kerbin itself or near to Kerbin itself is pretty negligible, so it wasn't the end of the world, but, you know, from a completionist's sake, I guess it would have been nice. By the way, here we are executing our big mid-course correction burn to change our inclination so that we can actually get our intercept with Eeloo. I love how just the gravity triangle, whatever I ended up calling it, sort of flexes when I initiate physics time warp. It's a little bit, you know, KSP's wobble physics can be a dampener sometimes, although kind of funny from a comedic side of things from the video. But yeah, it would have been nice if it didn't just deform like that when I initiated physics time warp. Here I am now trying to get my periapsis to be kind of close to Eeloo so that we can like have a slightly more efficient capture burn. I'm doing it with RCS, and I'm doing it very, very clumsily, as you can see. It's really, really sensitive and twitchy. So I was just sort of tapping I, J, K, and L, and H, and N on the keyboard to kind of do the RCS controls to try and force our periapsis to be a little bit lower, and ultimately I wasn't all that successful. So there we are. So I settled on this. We can just do a radial in-burn once we, enter Eeloo's sphere of influence if we want to get a little bit closer to the planet. And yeah, that's going to be happening very, very soon. Here we are just time warping around. And as you can see, at the moment, Eeloo is not in fact. So I guess I wasn't being entirely honest earlier when I said that Eeloo is the furthest planet from the sun. It is the furthest planet from the sun most of the time, but occasionally it will kind of dip sort of below Joule's orbit, and Joule becomes the furthest planet from the sun. So yeah, there we are. The two will never collide, luckily, in case you were concerned. And this is because Joule and Eeloo are locked in a 3-to-2 resonance, and they orbit the sun at different inclinations, so it's impossible for them to collide. And yeah, we've got, is that Bill Kerman on EVA? I can't see the, oh no, it's Bob Kerman on EVA, doing a little bit of science from space high above Eeloo. I forgot to enable SAS on the ship, so now we're kind of rotating like this. Hopefully Bob Kerman doesn't feel too sick whilst doing this. I mean, I guess it's because there's 0G, right? So he's getting on board the lander here. And the reason why the ship was spinning like that is because the gravity ring is sort of having an influence on the ship, is applying torque, right? So yeah, and there we are. Look at that. We can just about see Eeloo for the very first time, glistening there in the distance. I'm just going to perform a radial inburn so that our periapsis is a little bit closer. I don't really know why I did this, because it didn't really make much of a difference overall, because Eeloo's gravity is very, very small. And actually this was kind of detrimental, because I think having our capture burn be so close to the surface means it will actually put us on a collision course when we circularize. I'm doing the air quotes when I say circularize, because we won't be circularizing. We'll kind of have an apoapsis that then plops us down onto a collision course with the surface of Eeloo. It's not a big issue, right? We'll just time warp up to apoapsis and form a prograde burn. But yeah, that's what I was trying to say there. And look at that. Doesn't Eeloo look absolutely lovely? Now, I've got a pre-prepared thing to read to you. It's the quote from the Kerbal Astronomical Society when talking about Eeloo. So, there's been a considerable amount of controversy around the status of Eeloo as being a proper planet or just a lump of ice going around the sun. The debate is still ongoing, since most academic summits held to address the issue have devolved into, on good days, petty name-calling, and on worse ones, all-out brawls. But my particular Eeloo doesn't really look like the normal version of Eeloo, because I have Lynx's Parallax Continued mod installed, and I kind of had to do a mission to Eeloo at some point with this install, because the first time I showcased this in a different video, I hadn't installed it correctly, and so Eeloo kind of just looked like it does in stock KSP. It only looked good once you're on the surface. But now I've installed it correctly, and it actually looks a lot closer to KSP2's Eeloo. And Eeloo in KSP2, that was one of my favorite planetary upgrades for KSP2. It was so good having those big ice clips. So I thought I would also get the Kerbal Astronomical Society quote from KSP2, because that's probably more accurate to this particular version of Eeloo. So, Eeloo is Kerbal's most distinct orbiting body. This dwarf planet seems to enjoy its lonely, highly eccentric orbit, though it does dip into Joule's for brief visits. Missions here are costly, given Eeloo's orbit, low gravity, lack of atmosphere, and spotty solar power potential. Even so, the difficult trip is worth it to see the frozen cliffs up close. And yeah, the frozen cliffs in KSP2's Eeloo are much bigger and more dramatic than the ones in Lynx's Parallax Continued, but Lynx's Parallax Continued is nonetheless still very pretty. And I thought I'd aim to kind of land kind of with it to close to the edge of one of those big canyons, and there they are, coming down into view as Bob Kerman and Jebediah Kerman begin their descent in the lander. And yeah, I spotted like a little mesa in the middle of this sort of large canyon opening area. It's probably got a geographic name, like a geological name, but I don't know what that is, so apologies for that. If you are any geologists watching, can leave a comment, let me know if this has a proper name. But there we are. Pretty much nailed that, didn't we? I didn't want to land in the canyon itself because Well, now I think about it, I don't really know why I didn't want to land in the canyon itself. In fact, if anything, it would have been better to land in the canyon. So we had a more epic background for any potential screenshots, etc, etc. But here we are, touching down nice and gently. There we go. So now that we've landed, we can run an action group that, runs all of our science experiments. We can gather the precious data. Now, if you wanted to emulate this particular mission, this lander would be great for getting lots and lots of science, because as you can see, we have a huge amount of delta V, so we could very easily hop around different biomes, gather up an enormous amount of science. But, as I've said several times during this playthrough, we're only doing one landing per celestial body, so that, it varies up where we go. And yes, I think I've deviated from kind of the normal player progression of KSP1, like going straight from Duna to Eeloo. It's quite a big jump. I think most players will then kind of do maybe like a one-way Eve mission after doing Duna. Like when I say one-way Eve mission, I of course mean sending a robotic, uncrewed like rover or lander, right? Not, you wouldn't go and send a Kerbal on a one-way mission there, would you? And here we are, Jebediah Kerman has got a banana. We're doing an EVA science experiment once again. There we are. It's like those classic experiments you see kind of in videos where people submerge a banana in liquid nitrogen, freeze it, and then smash it with a hammer. There we are. That's probably... I don't know if there's a specific science experiment that was done in space about smashing a banana. Maybe someone could enlighten me in the comments, but there we are. And then, of course, we can do the most important part of any surface excursion in Kerbal Space Program, that is planting the Lowne Aerospace flag. There we are, with a nice little commemorative plaque. And there they are, they can just stare off into space for a bit, literally, right? And then, well, now that we've done all the important stuff, we can get back on the lander and start thinking about getting back to the mothership. But before I forget, when I was reading out those Kerbal Astronomical Society descriptions of Eeloo, one thing that did catch my eye was that it said that Eeloo does not have an atmosphere, which actually... Well, that's true, it doesn't have an atmosphere, but it was actually planned to have an atmosphere when it was first conceived by Harvester back in the day, and, real-life equivalent of Eeloo, Pluto, and I guess geologically it's very similar to Jupiter's moon Europa, and both Europa and Pluto are understood to have a very, very tenuous atmosphere. Unfortunately, my understanding of why it doesn't have an atmosphere in KSP is because KSP's, model or engine, this is where I'm very out of my depth because I'm not a programmer or a coder at all, it basically can't do atmospheres on any celestial body that's smaller than Duna. I'm not sure why, that's the extent of my knowledge of this, but yeah, that's just a little interesting bit of a tidbit, because I know Moho, when Moho was first added to the game, that had an atmosphere, and it was punishingly difficult. I keep thinking about doing a video where I install the version of KSP that had... I'm looking at the screen. I totally overcooked my ascent burn just there. So I'm kind of did a bit of a retrograde burn and a prograde burn to adjust and kind of get an intersect with our target vessel without even needing to do a maneuver node. Look at that. Lovely close separation. 0.1 kilometers. So... great stuff. What was I talking about? Oh yes, I did think about installing or downgrading my KSP install so I have the version of Moho that has the atmosphere. But I've watched videos online of Scott Manley attempting a landing and stuff, and it just looks not fun. Basically, it was very, very hot atmosphere, so things just explode and overheat, and it's not great. Anyway, Bob Kerman there spinning a little wing nut there, doing that tennis racket theorem experiment, and then you get back onto the ship. And I think that's pretty much all of the science that we need to gather from this. I think we need to run the magnetometer from space near to Eeloo. I don't think I've done that experiment yet, but the magnetometer is on the mothership. It's not on the lander, but I can see the mothership, right? It's now coming into view. Bill Kerman once again being left behind. I really ought to make a 3-seat lander so Bill Kerman can finally come on one of these surface missions. I've been neglecting Valentina. I kind of feel sorry for Valentina. She's not been coming with us, but the command pod I've been using basically for the whole of this playthrough has only had 3 seats, so I guess that's kind of not an excuse now because look at the crew capacity of this ship. But I'm just thinking about the re-entry module, right? Maybe I'll have to add the little Mercury style command pod on top of the Apollo style command pod to make one giant 4-seater one. I don't know, it's food for thought. But like I say, in the next mission I'm thinking we just do something fun. Not that this isn't fun. I actually find this more fun than building space stations and comm networks. But, doing something fun as in building a space station or doing a comm network or maybe even establishing a MUN base or something like that. I don't think I'm going to do too many non-science gathering missions before I've finished unlocking the tech tree, just because we really do need to be prioritizing unlocking the tech tree because there are some components I would really like before we want to start thinking about building things like Mun bases. But yeah, it's just things to think about, I suppose. I better start thinking about it quickly, right? Because this mission is closing up. We've not got much footage left for me to talk over before I need to actually think about where we're going to be going for our next mission. We do still need to plot a journey back to Kerbin, though, so that's going to be kind of the next big challenge to overcome for, you know, our Eeloo mission. Now, I couldn't remember if I'd run the science experiments on the lander in space near to Eeloo, so I just quickly ran them again, and then I boarded the command pod. It said, you've already got this data, so I had to dump the experiment, so wasted my time a little bit there. And look how much delta V we've got left. Oh my goodness, 3,419 meters per second. So maybe I over-engineered this ship somewhat, but I kind of wanted lots of delta V so that I could force a Kerbin encounter without having to wait for a transfer window, which might have meant doing a very expensive kind of interplanetary mid-course correction burn. Sometimes you need to do like a big radial in or radial out burn around the sun, which they can be very expensive. So I thought, let's just bring a bit of extra delta V so I can kind of force a Kerbin encounter. And this is me attempting to force said Kerbin encounter. So just those grey nodes creeping closer and closer together. I have sped the footage up a bit, so you're not spending quite as long as I spent trying to get the maneuver node to work, I guess. So we are, getting a little bit closer there. Just a little bit more tweaking, and I think... there we are. We have a Kerbin encounter manifesting itself before our eyes. So, yes, now we can go ahead and perform that maneuver burn and get our Kerbin intercept. I didn't really look beyond just getting the intercept, and I didn't try and get our periapsis to intercept Kerbin's atmosphere for this particular burn, because it would make more sense just get the intercept and then do a second, much smaller mid-course correction burn to I kind of fine-tune the Kerbin encounter, if that makes sense. So yeah, here we are executing that one big... This is probably like our final really, really big burn of the mission. It's so fun just watching that gravity ring or gravity triangle. I can't remember what I decided to call it now. Gravity spinning up as we form our little burn just here. Well, say little burn, it's a big old burn, isn't it? Yeah, I did warn you guys that I might start flagging when commentating over this mission because, we're in a bit of a heat wave. I've got like lots of cold fizzy drinks I got out of my fridge. I'm sort of like just holding on to a can of Coke just so that there's something cold touching my skin, and then hopefully that cools my blood as it flows around the rest of me. This was weird. And but it's I'm flagging a bit. Like I say, it's we've got a bit of a heat wave going on. The room I record in is very, very small. It's like probably like 1.5 meters by 3 meters. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. Sorry, Americans. And the walls are covered in foam. There's 2 big, hot 4K monitors blasting into my face. I've got my full tower, big, beefy PC that's churning out heat. It's not a great recipe for comfortable recording sessions, let me just say. And I can't have my window open because I don't want my neighbors to think I'm some sort of weirdo that just talks to myself. And I don't have my door open so that... I guess same sort of reasons, really. I don't want to reduce the echo and all that, basically. So yeah, what have I'm just looking back at the screen. What have I missed that I didn't talk about whilst I was complaining about the conditions in which I'm currently sitting? So here we are performing our mid-course correction burn to get that fine-tuned Kerbin periapsis of 17-ish kilometers. It's very, very low, but we have the almighty ablative heat shield on our re-entry module, which is very, very OP. And I've overshot. So like before, when I was trying to get my Eeloo encounter fine-tuned, I just used RCS to try and get our periapsis around Kerbin a little bit more optimal. I did a better job this time than I did with Eeloo, though. And there is Kerbin, looming ahead, which means that Jebediah Kerbin, Bill Kerbin, and Bob Kerbin are going to be returning home after spending a massive 6 years and 17 days in space. And they didn't even use my gravity ring. They just sat in the Apollo-style command pod the entire time. I told a bit of a fib then, didn't I? Now that we've just time warped, it's now been 6 years and 18 days. So there we are. They're going to safely re-enter with no issues whatsoever. That's right. There's going to be some drama here. I right-clicked the docking port and I couldn't see the undock button. Like, where is it? There's no undock button. Right? I'm just looking at it. Yeah, there definitely isn't. I was like, how do I undock these 2 ships? So then, then it kind of exploded and then it worked. I then realized if I right-clicked the lander's docking port, that's where the undock button is I feel like this has never been a thing, right? Has it? Where like just watching the explosions in the background there. This has never been a thing, right? Where you only one of the docking ports can be undocked. It might be because I've got the community fixes mod installed. I can't remember the name of the mod, but it's like a community patch basically to fix a few things with KSP. The main reason I have it is because it fixes that really annoying sound bug where engines will stop making sounds, after playing for a certain amount of time. You've got to restart the game to fix it. That's kind of why I have it installed. And yeah, I had a brief panic there where the game just seemed to freeze for a couple of seconds. I was like, please don't freeze now. We've nearly finished the mission. And yeah, we can deploy our parachutes, coming in for a nice splashdown over Kerbin's oceans. And we can jettison our heat shield just to slightly lower our descent speed, so our impact speed is as low as possible. This is taking a while. Let's just speed the footage up. Here we go. Look at that lovely water appearing beneath us. And there we have it. Splashdown has successfully taken place. Just do a quick vision inspection of the pod. Yep, all seems tickety-boo. So we can just go ahead and recover our vessel and just have a look at how much science we earned from this mission. Let's see. 5,592 science earned. That's going to be tremendous in our quest to unlock the tech tree. Just recovered the debris on the launch pad just there. So let's go to the R&D facility and see what we can unlock. So as I mentioned earlier, I kind of wanted to be able to build like deep space communications networks. So I went down the automation side of the tech tree to get the big communications dishes and, I then saw a little browse of the other tabs available. I remembered, yes, it would be nice to have the bigger rover wheel, so I've unlocked field science and advanced motors so that we've got those big beefy rover wheels, and if we're going to be launching big beefy rovers, it'd be nice to be able to launch big beefy rockets. So we've unlocked the massive 5-meter diameter Saturn V parts, so future missions we can have massive rockets. And now I don't really have any priorities on the tech tree, so I'm just going to unlock things that I think look like they might be fun. So we've unlocked some more plane parts here with, heavy landing and hypersonic flight and all that stuff. And we need to unlock the meta materials tab because we get the 4-way... No, it's not 4-way, is it? It's a 6-way connector piece, so we can build space stations more easily with it, basically. Although I don't really use it that often when I build space stations these days, so I don't know, we might not even need it. And is there a moral to this story? I'm not sure. And now you can see I'm just sort of deliberating which tabs to unlock, and there we are. That's pretty much all we can unlock now. We've only got 332 science remaining, so for now, this is the status of the tech tree with the completion of our Eeloo mission. With the completion of the Eeloo mission, we're going to take a quick break from unlocking science and focus on the construction of a deep space communications relay network. This is something I've actually never done before, so it'll be a fun old challenge. I deliberated building out a satellite network around Kerbin, Mun, and Minmus, like I have on previous playthroughs of KSP, but I thought that it might be more useful to have a ring of ultra-powerful relays orbiting around the sun in an orbit a little higher than Duna's, so that Kerbin can communicate with a satellite anywhere in the solar system, provided it's not occluded by whatever planet and moon it happens to be orbiting. We can address that problem at a later date though with smaller supplementary satellites orbiting the major celestial bodies. Anyway, on screen, construction is going well. I'm building a mothership that will deploy 4 relay satellites evenly around the sun, with the mothership itself equipped with a relay so it can serve as the 5th and final relay in the network. I felt that 5 satellites was a good number so that a spacecraft / planet / moon is never too far away from a relay satellite. There won't be too much of a gap between the satellites at the orbital height I'm going to send them to, which again will be an orbit a little higher than Duna's. I settled on 30 gigameters above the sun, or 30 billion meters. It just seemed like a nice round number, and I find myself visiting Duna and all the inner planets more frequently than the outer planets, and a network that surrounds the inner planets means that even on the far side of the inner planets and moons relative to Kerbin, a spacecraft should almost always still be able to talk to the Kerbal Space Center by pinging across the relay network without us needing to install dedicated relays around each planet and each moon. One thing I should mention about the rocket, I had to use a 5-meter wide fairing base in order to accommodate the payload, but then using the 5-meter size parts made the rocket way overpowered for the actual mass of the payload, so I kind of made a 2.5 meter diameter rocket, but then surrounded it with 5-meter fairings to kind of give it a more proportional size, basically. But looking on screen, it looks like things are pretty much done, so I'm just going to dot the I's and cross the T's and head on to the launch pad ready to go traveling. travels begin as we lift off from the launch pad, propelled by the two mainsail first stage engines. The first stage burn is actually kind of a long one, so you'll get to watch those lovely engine plumes, courtesy of the mod Waterfall, gradually expand as the air pressure gets lower and lower. Now, I should point out that we have a Kerbal Engineer window on screen near the top left there. This is mostly because setting up satellite networks requires some readings that aren't provided in stock KSP's UI. Well, it's not like the information is unobtainable, but we need to calculate it ourselves, and Kerbal Engineer just does the calculations in real time, so that's why we've got that window there. The most important value there is orbital period, which isn't something that's easily viewed in KSP without mods. Your orbital period is the amount of time it takes to complete one orbit. So a real-life example is the International Space Station's orbital period, which is approximately 90 minutes, meaning it completes one full orbit around Earth every 90 minutes, and allowing the onboard astronauts to experience around 16 sunrises and sunsets every day. Honestly, it must be so surreal. Space is so cool, man, isn't it? Anyway, we basically kind of got through the bulk of our ascent there. We have ditched the first stage with those two aforementioned mainsail engines. Now we're burning our upper stage with our skipper engine. It's not going to get us all the way into circular orbit, but it's going to get us basically 99% of the way there, and then we can complete circularization, that was a hard word to say, using our spacecraft, which we are beginning now. The reason why I didn't want to achieve complete circularization using that lower stage is because I didn't want to leave any debris left in low Kerbin orbit, right? So if we stage it now, it's going to just burn up in the atmosphere and not leave any junk floating around in space, avoiding Kessler syndrome and all that stuff. So just watching our apoapsis height reading, and there we are. It is now above the border of space. We carried on burning a bit longer because obviously we still need to course through the atmosphere with a very unaerodynamic payload, so we are going to bleed off a bit of that speed and reduce our apoapsis height. But there we are. We have an apoapsis of basically 74 kilometers, and we ourselves are past the border of the atmosphere, so no more drag is being induced on the craft, so we can time warp and perform a very cheap circularization burn, less than 50 meters per second. It's just dawned on me that I kind of went through a big explanation about how we need to be able to see our orbital period using that Kerbal Engineer readout, and then didn't really explain why it's important. Basically, we want all 5 satellites to be equidistant around the sun, so we've got a nice evenly spread out network, and that means that we kind of want them all to have basically the same orbital period, because if one of them has a lower orbital period, then we'll start catching up to the next satellite, if that makes sense, and everything just gets spread out, basically. So that's why it's important. So we don't actually really need the orbital period till the very end, because the first stage is going to be just placing the satellites in kind of roughly the right spot, and then at the very end we can just do fine-tune burns to get them all having roughly the same kind of orbital period. I then time warped 1,600 and something years into the future to test to make sure that they stayed in alignment, and they more or less did. One of them kind of shifted a little bit, but honestly, if this means that this lasts almost 2,000 years without needing to be replaced, I think once every 2,000 years I'm happy to just put a new satellite network up in place. So we're doing our escape burn from Kerbin in 2 phases, just because we're only powered by 1 nuclear engine, and it's kind of a fairly heavy payload for 1 nuclear engine to push, and you know, it's got very low thrust to weight ratio, so I decided to split the escape burn up into 2 roughly equal sized burns. So the first one I think was just over 500 meters per second. This one is just below 800 meters per second. And yeah, it's going to put us on a trajectory that raises our apoapsis around the sun to be our desired orbital height. So I'm aiming for precisely, zoom in a little bit there so you guys can see a bit more easily, precisely 30 billion meters above the sun. So yeah, now we're getting really close. I'm just lowering the thrust limiter of the nuclear engine. You might have spotted in the build time lapse, but just in case you didn't, I've also added some very, very small RCS blocks to all the craft on this vehicle. Like, how much monopropellant do I have in total? The total monopropellant is 26.99 units spread across 5 vehicles. They don't have very much monopropellant, but literally the RCS blocks are going to be set to about 1% thrust. That's the kind of precision burning that we're going to be doing for this mission. But I think pretty much we've established our orbital height there. We should make sure to deploy our solar panels so we don't run out of electric charge on the way. That would be a shame, wouldn't it? But yeah, I guess off we go to interplanetary space. So now that we have our apoapsis around the sun all set, begs the question, what should we raise our periapsis to? Because we want all 5 satellites to be equidistant from one another in a nice pentagram shape around the sun, which will also kind of draw a little star using the lines between the satellites. Yeah, so that'll be nice, won't it? The way we will achieve this is we will put ourselves on a resonant orbit of our final 30 gigameter circular orbit. By resonant orbit or phase orbit, I mean an orbit where every time the mothership reaches apoapsis, the most recently deployed satellite has moved forward by 72 degrees, which is 1/5 of 360 degrees. To calculate this, we need to do maths, which I hate. So I did what any sensible person would do and headed to ChatGPT, and it got everything completely wrong. So then I decided to be smarter and calculate things myself. Just kidding, of course. I used a website called Resonant Orbit Calculator for Kerbal Space Program by Eric Meyer. It's a great, simple little website that lets you calculate phase orbits, or resonant orbits, required for a carrier spacecraft to deploy spacecraft to equidistant positions in a shared circular orbit, so perfect for setting up relay networks like this one. It also tells you the injection delta V value, which is how much delta V you'll need to move from the phase orbit into the final orbit, which we're kind of doing right now with our first deployed satellite. So for a 30 gigameter circular orbit around the sun with a goal of having 5 equidistant satellites around it, we needed an apoapsis of 30 gigameters obviously, and a periapsis of precisely 21,634,112,654.6 meters, which is a very precise number. I'm not going to sweat too much about getting it exactly spot on, as you probably saw when I did the burn, but I tried to get as close as possible. And there we are, we just, like I said, deployed the first satellite. Now we're just going to get ourselves as close to a perfectly circular orbit as possible. Obviously, to do that, we'll need to kind of time warp to between apoapsis and periapsis to kind of modify our apogee and perigee accordingly, but obviously we can't do it completely because then the mothership, which I've now switched to, is going to reach its apoapsis and we're going to be needing to deploy our next satellite. So that's kind of it, right? I know I've kind of said throughout this playthrough that it's not really, you shouldn't use this as a tutorial, but I think this mission could be the one that breaks the trend, because I've never actually built an interplanetary deep space interplanetary orbital relay network like this. And I did kind of like a cursory search on YouTube to see if anyone else had done that, to see kind of what worked about the video, what didn't work about the video, and I couldn't really see many examples. So hey, I'm feeling like a little niche that's not really been filled too much before. So yeah, there we are. We've deployed our second satellite, and look at that. Lovely little separation between the first and second. I was getting quite happy that, yes, things had been calculated correctly. So now we can deploy our next one. One thing I didn't get quite right about the satellites is I put the decouplers on the wrong way round. So kind of when they detach from the mothership, the decoupler is still attached to the satellite. I thought I was being really careful to make sure the decouplers were definitely pointing the right way when I built the craft, but obviously I messed up. Luckily, it didn't affect the engine performance. That would have been annoying to have to revert flight and change all those decouplers, so glad they didn't make any glad they didn't have any detrimental effects to the performance of the satellites. Another issue I had, you might have noticed, is prograde and retrograde are flipped. I obviously put the probe core on upside down. The problem with the probe cores in KSP, a lot of them, most of them in fact, there isn't really an easy way to distinguish whether or not it's upside down or, the wrong way around essentially. The gold one, which I haven't unlocked yet in this playthrough, has a little text box on it, so that's kind of easy. Maybe this one that I've used does too, but it's really small. Who's got time to zoom in and see if you're placing it the right way around? And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't really mind if prograde and retrograde are flipped, as long as I know that, they're aligned along the center of mass, and that burning prograde will be retrograde and retrograde will be prograde, and you've got to hold some weird angle, basically. Anyway, it looks to me like the satellite network is basically complete. Look at that. We just have to do one more circularization, and that is with the mothership. Yeah, rather than having... I initially prototyped this to be like 5 satellites that all deploy separately, and then we have to kind of crash the mothership onto somewhere like Duna or Eve or somewhere. And then I realized, wait, that's kind of dumb. Why don't we just put a relay on the mothership, and then the mothership serves as the final relay node? So that's what we're doing. Hey, look at that. We've got that lovely pentagram shape going around the sun, and it forms a little star as well around the star. So that's nice. And they've all got a bright green connection to Kerbin, which is what we want. Basically, you can probably kind of figure it out just by looking at it, right? But to those that don't know, bright green means there's a very strong, good connection. Then kind of fainter green is not so good, and then red is even worse than that. And yeah, not really a big issue for the most part when it comes to communications. But if you're doing things like broadcasting science experiments back to Kerbin, you don't get as much science reward as if you have a low. So if you have a low signal strength, the science you get isn't as good as if you had compared to if you had a higher signal strength. And that's that's a sentence that I really struggled to say somehow. So as I mentioned earlier, what I decided to do now was time warp way into the future to make sure that these satellites will stay equidistant for a long period of time. So I made a quick save, obviously, because I'm not a psychopath, and we can revert to that quick save once we've done this little experiment. So this time didn't actually pass in real life. I've made the clock a bit bigger on screen so you can see it more easily, just how far into the future that we're time warping. And then we'll kind of pause it when I feel we're at a point where, okay, the separation now is not so great. You can see already one of the satellites is moving a bit too quickly. It's actually catching up with I think that's the mothership node that it's catching up to. So clearly we're going to need to go back and have a look at that particular satellite because obviously its orbital period is too low. So again, you can see our orbital period here for this particular node is 3 years, 136 days, 2 hours, and yeah, that's it. I'm pausing it here because I felt like now this is kind of too unacceptable. So 1,366 years is the lifespan of the satellite network here. I did carry on time warping, so you can kind of see the results of that. That kind of, by the time we get into like 1,700 years, the satellites are too close together. So we're going to go back. I reloaded the quick save, so now we're not actually that. We're only 12 years into the mission now. Yeah, it's kind of a long mission because of the distances these satellites are covering. So here we have switched to the offending spacecraft, and its orbital period is 3 years, 136 days, and 22 minutes, which is obviously too low. We need that orbital period to be longer. So I noticed our periapsis is actually, 7 meters. I think, squinting at my screen there, 7 meters too low. So that's kind of the values we're dealing with here. So we'll try and get it a bit more circular, so a bit closer to a perfectly circular 30 gigameter high orbit. And hopefully that fixes things. So let's have a look at its orbital period once things are fixed. So again, just warping around, trying to match our periapsis and our apoapsis to be as close as physically possible. And then look at the orbital period. So forget about the days and years. The thing we care about is the 1 hour and 45 minutes. Or now it's 1 hour and 43 minutes. No, 1 hour and 44 minutes. Shouldn't try to commentate this sort of thing in real life, should I? So there you go. 1 hour. Is it going to change again? No, it looks like that. For an hour and... Or am I still doing corrective burns here? I'm going to zoom out my timer. No, I think we're pretty much done. So yeah, about an hour and 44 minutes is a kind of the orbital period that we now have. So we can switch to the other satellites, which stayed relatively equidistant for that massive nearly 2,000 year time warp. So we know that their orbital periods are roughly the same. So let's make sure that their orbital period is roughly 3 years, 136 days, 1 hour, 44 minutes. So yeah, let's go ahead and switch to one. Loading. Oh, there we are. 1 hour, 45 minutes. So as close. I think that 1 minute is going to, for the lifespan of this save file, I think this is going to be fine. So I actually just I went ahead and just renamed all the relays to be kind of 30 gigameter relay in case I do another satellite network later on. And yeah, I checked the orbital periods. They were all about 1 hour 44 or 1 hour 45. So there was only ever there's less than a minute basically between their orbital periods, which I was satisfied with. What I wasn't too satisfied with was the fact that we didn't unlock anything for this mission. And I felt like we can't just move straight on to the next mission without having something unlocked. So because we didn't get any science, we can't, unlock any parts. But what we can unlock is another launch site. So I quickly speed built this jet here. There we are. And we're going ahead and unlock the easiest launch site to unlock. In case you don't know, there are multiple launch sites around Kerbin. I've done a full video showing you how to unlock all of them using aeroplanes. But the easiest one to unlock by far is the Cove launch site, because it's very, very close to the Kerbal Space Center. You can get there in a little aircraft like this. We'll just speed the push up a little bit and switch the Panthers to their afterburner mode to get there nice and fast for the Kerbals as well. Also, Valentina is on her first flight for this entire playthrough. So nice that she can finally get out of the house and go exploring with her friends. And yeah, just looming up ahead, I can just about see it in that little, Cove. It's the Cove launch site. And it's probably the most useful out of all the unlockable Cove sites. Cove site, is probably the most useful out of all of the unlockable launch sites, because if you look really carefully in the water, you can see the launch pad. So launching like aquacraft, so boats, hovercrafts, floating platforms, whatever, really easy. You can just put them on that launch pad and just roll them down the very convenient ramp into the ocean. And it is great. It's a really, really useful launch site to have under our belt for Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. So, although we didn't unlock any parts, we unlocked a new launch site. So, there we are. I don't know what the moral to the story is. But anyway, right now, I want to talk to you about the final boss, Bowser, Ganondorf, Robotnik, the camera from Super Mario 6. The final boss is a legendary title to hold. One last challenge a video game throws at the player before it admits defeat. And here we are, standing at the end of our KSP playthrough with one final mission to go. KSP doesn't have a story or enemies really, but I believe it does have what could be considered a final boss, Eve. The most difficult solid celestial body to take off from in the entire game, taking almost twice as much Delta V to reach orbit compared with Kerbin. And unlike Kerbin, you also need to launch a vessel that can get your enormous Eve lander from Kerbin to the surface of Eve in the first place, and have it survive the punishingly treacherous Eve atmospheric entry. Sure, there are harder challenges like Duel 5 or Grand Tour, but I consider these to be arbitrary missions, whereas Eve Return is just a simple go to a place, land there, and come back. And so that's why I consider it the final boss of Kerbal Space Program, and that's why it's going to be the final mission before tech tree completion that we do in Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. So we begin our build with the hardest part, the Eve Ascent vehicle. Since every landing, bar our Minmus mission, saw both Bob Kerman and Jebediah Kerman go down to the planetary surface, it only seemed right that the Eve lander should be two-seater. I've built two-seat Eve landers before, but I often go with the Mark 1 size cockpit and stack one on top of the other, so this time I thought I'd experiment with the Gemini-style cockpit and fuel tanks that come with the Making History DLC. It's basically the size in between the Mark 1 size and the 2.5 meter size that we've been using in this playthrough so far. The upper stage is powered by a high efficiency but relatively low thrust Cheetah engine, while the first stage is going to need considerably more power. I wanted this lander to be a do-it-all Eve lander, which means it should be able to reach Eve orbit when starting at Eve sea level, a scenario that we're probably not going to need to contend with here. But if you're a channel member or a Patreon supporter, then you'll be able to download this craft file and use it for yourself. And so I wanted this to be able to return from anywhere on Eve. Except the sea itself. I mean, I haven't actually tested water landings, but I'm 100% certain that attempting to land this thing in water, or whatever comprises Eve's oceans, will cause it to fall over. Anyway, the first stage is powered by 2 vector engines bolstered by 6 surrounding aerospike stacks, which feed into the core via asparagus staging, meaning that only 2 of the 6 are consuming fuel at any one time, supplying the entire craft with fuel so that when they stage, the rocket remains at full fuel capacity. This is the most efficient way to design a rocket like this, and rather than using fuel lines, I used the fuel flow priority setting. It can only be accessed if you enable advanced tweakables in the difficulty settings, and the way it works is that each tank is assigned a number. The lower the number, the lower in the chain that tank is. So for example, if you have 4 tanks, then tanks with fuel priority value 4 will drain first, then those with value 3, then 2, then 1, then 0, if that makes sense. So yeah, very powerful first stage because Eve has very high gravity, 1.7 G, and a much thicker atmosphere than Kerbin, and high atmospheric pressure as well. A lot of engines don't even work at Eve sea level, which is why I'm using very well optimized sea level engines. But as you can see, the lander itself is basically done. I added a little rover to the side as well that we can deploy, but while we're talking about optimization, you might have spotted that all the non-flight essential components like the ladders, landing gear, and science modules are all attached via decoupler, so that we can ditch them upon Eve liftoff, giving us the best possible chance at reaching orbit. I have 2 pairs of science juniors as well, so that we can run science experiments during descent in the higher atmosphere and experiments in the lower atmosphere as well. We need 2 science juniors and goo units because during hypersonic entry, we can't have Bob Kerman go on EVA to restore them. I mentioned that another benefit to having 2 is redundancy, because above the command module and the science pods are 4 large inflatable heat shields, or at least there will be momentarily. First of all, I'm adding a heat shield at the bottom of the lander. This, if you can believe it, is to protect the lander from the deadly heat of EVE atmospheric entry. However, we do need heat shields at the top to create lots of drag up there, and again, make sure that this thing remains base first during EVE atmospheric entry. I started adding this little kind of decoupler at the top just here. I ended up ditching this because I realized we don't need 5 heat shields, right? We only need the 4. So here I am adding the surrounding 4. We'll delete that central one. There we go, in just a second. And there we are. Now, at the moment, things aren't ideal with those heat shields because we're going to need to detach them once they've served their purpose and we're under controlled parachute descent. Doing so can cause glitchiness, and sometimes they can swipe the lander and cause things to break. So the way I decided to change things up and mitigate against this is, as you can see, I've attached them to some pistons, which will extend to get them as far away from the vehicle as possible, and I've made the connection to the pistons very weak, so hopefully aerodynamic / Kraken forces will cause them to be ripped away harmlessly. The connection is weak because I used a very thin piston. The connection will only become weak when I want it to, though. Prior to extension, the shield to be anchored in place with struts. But there we are. I think we can call the lander done, so now it's time to design the ship that will get it to EVE from Kerbin. First up, this is the Interplanetary transfer stage, featuring a cozy Apollo-style command pod for Jeb, Bill and Bob to live aboard, and then it'll have a bucket load of liquid fuel for its high-efficiency nuclear engines. It'll need a lot of Delta V to push the heavy lander across interplanetary space to EVE, capturing via engine burn rather than aerobraking, as aero capture at EVE can often end very deadly-y. That's a word, right? After the EVE landing is done, I then want to head on out to its moon Gilly and gather some science from there. And without being weighed down by the EVE lander, this thing will be more than capable of doing the Gilly landing itself, and there's no need for landing gear either. Gilly's gravity is so weak that we can safely just rest on the engine bells. Now, at the moment, this thing won't be very safe during an ascent from Kerbin if there is an anomaly aboard the vehicle and we need to do a launch abort, because there's no launch abort system, because the crew compartment is in the middle of the stack. So I added this little thing at the top. You'll see it kind of come together in just a second. Here we are. I'm adding a little kind of command vehicle that Jeb, Bob and Bill will sit in during Kerbin ascent, that if we need to do an abort, they can just, be pulled away by that launch escape tower and be fine. And it has a probe core on board so that if we get to space safely, which, spoiler alert, we make it to space okay, we can get rid of it and it can just deorbit itself under probe control. I know it's not needed in Kerbal Space Program because you can just press revert to launch or revert to vehicle assembly building or whatever, but what can I say? We look after our astronauts here at Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. There we are. And then for the rest of the rocket, just a big dumb booster, really. 2 massive shuttle-style, SLS-style SRBs flanking an enormous 5-meter fuselage. And then I sort of got a bit scared. I thought maybe I need a bit more liquid fuel at the interplanetary transfer stage, so I did those extra fuel tanks there. Spoiler alert, I didn't. In fact, I added way too much Delta V to that interplanetary transfer vehicle. I think I must have just got confused or had my Delta V value set up wrong in the vehicle assembly building. I'm not sure. But we had way more fuel than we needed. But, rather have too much than too few, or too little, Anyway, here I am time warping to an EVE, to a Kerbin to EVE transfer window. Basically draw a line from Kerbin to the sun to EVE. EVE needs to be about 55 degrees behind Kerbin. But I do believe that is all of the pre-launch stuff all done. We've built the rocket, we've time warped to the transfer window, so I guess we need to just launch. And for one last time, we are airborne once again. Jebediah Kerman, Bill Kerman and Bob Kerman there with their high-tech breaking ground spacesuits. Enjoying the ride, or at least Jebediah's enjoying the ride. Bill and Bob look a little bit more reserved, don't they? I mean, I gave them the launch escape tower, so they should be happy that I've, made them this nice, safe launch vehicle. As we power through, are the clouds going to come into view, or are we launching on a fairly cloudless day by the looks of things? And there's the sonic boom there as we go supersonic, or at least the vapor cone, as we go supersonic, and our solid rocket boosters are almost out of fuel, I can see, so we'll stage those. It's kind of a treacherous staging event, actually. Watch this. They don't. I really should have added some Separatrons. I thought I did add Separatrons, and then when I launched, I was like, oh, I didn't, but I guess it's like a Mandela effect, sort of, like a micro Mandela effect, because it only affected me in the space of 10 minutes. But yeah, I could have sworn I added Separatrons. Anyway, it was all fine in the end, and as you can see, the first stage core has gone as well. So now it's time to launch our still massive upper stage. It's powered by 2 mainsail engines. 1 mainsail is usually enough to power an entire first stage core, hence why it's called mainsail. So yeah, that's just to give you a sense of scale of how big this thing is. And with the flame out of that second stage, we're still not in circular Kerbin orbit, although we do have an apoapsis above the atmosphere at this point. So now we're going to begin the treacherous, dangerous maneuver. So I guess maybe this wasn't the safest craft. Maybe this is why Bob and Bill were so worried, because they knew they'd have to do this sort of tricky maneuver. Not even in space yet, quickly jetpacking over into the vehicle so that we can ditch the launch escape module and then stage the lower stage and circularize into a nice stable orbit. But we've not got long. You got less than 2 minutes to apoapsis, so had to do things fairly quickly. But as you can see, it was all fine in the end. So I thought about using the engines on this thing, but then I remembered, we could just activate the launch escape tower, and it just put us on a nice suborbital trajectory. So now in my head canon, that thing will land robotically. It's not got a heat shield, but it doesn't need a heat shield from where it's re-entering from. It's got a probe core on board, so it will now descend, deploy its parachutes, and be recovered. That's not going to be the case in reality, though, because it's going to just despawn. But that was the idea anyway. And now we can circularize our vehicle. I'm going to go for an 80-kilometer apoapsis, and we'll circularize apoapsis, or periapsis is a similar height, because it's going to be a long old burn to Eve, and so it is going to force our periapsis down a little bit when we do that burn. So we need to have a bit of wiggle room so that the periapsis doesn't dip into Kerbin's atmosphere. And even then, we had to do the burn in 2 phases, because doing it in 1 phase, I think it worked out to be, looking at the screen, about a 15-minute burn. It's way too long. We're going to just end up diving straight into Kerbin's atmosphere. So we'll split it in half, but first we're going to get our Eve encounter. As you can see, we've got the Eve encounter. So now we'll have to drag on retrograde and reduce it by about half. So it's about 1 kilometer per second of delta V, that burn. So we'll reduce that to about 500 meters per second and do it that way. I remember this now, actually. I was having wishful thinking, like, maybe I'll be able to do the burn. But then I got to the burn indication, I was like, we're basically pointing directly radial in. This is no good. So there we are, 577 meters per second for our first burn. And then again, we'll make another maneuver plan at our periapsis to get our Eve encounter once again. But yeah, really speeding the footage up here because this was a long old burn. We've only got 4 nuclear engines powering this very, very heavy vehicle. The Eve landers are always comically large compared to the interplanetary transfer vessels. There we are. We're going to make our second maneuver node now. Hopefully we should get an Eve encounter as easily as we got the first time. There we are, and it's actually happening a little bit sooner into our flight, so our flight time has been reduced a bit. Probably not that much comfort for Jeb, Bob and Bill, because it's going to be a very long old flight nonetheless. For missions like when we went to Eeloo and Duna, I added things like gravity rings and large habitats to keep them healthy, but Eve, we got to be very, very frugal here, so they're going to just have to make do on the Apollo-style command pod. So luckily, Kerbals, it's canon that they love being in space. That's all they want to do. They just want to get to space. Look at the planet Kerbin. It's literally only got like 4 buildings, and they're basically all dedicated to going to space. The other buildings are like ancient pyramids, and I think that might be it. I'm just trying to think. There's a UFO in the Antarctic, or the Arctic, I don't remember which one. But again, that's still kind of dedicated to going to space, and I guess it's not a Kerbal vessel, right? The idea is it was an alien because it's a UFO. So no, I don't think there are any other buildings on Kerbin that are not dedicated explicitly to going to space. So they love space, so they'll be fine. I'm just trying to justify giving them horrible living conditions. I gave them a book. I gave them a copy of The Martian by Andy Weir. It's a great story, It's about being stranded and barely surviving on an alien planet, actually. So maybe it's not the best. Maybe it's not the best motivation, but either way, it should provide sufficient entertainment during the mission. As you can see, whilst I was waffling there, I plotted a mid-course correction burn so that our periapsis, as we pass Eve, is nice and close to its atmospheric border. And now we are doing said mid-course correction burn. So we'll cut to the map screen in just a second and have a look at where our orbital line takes us. Oh, look at that. Lovely and close. And we've got this nice horseshoe-shaped kind of flyby, which means our capture burn is going to be relatively cheap, 384.1 meters per second. Obviously, we kind of want to get into a low Eve orbit, but that's going to be considerably more expensive. So we'll separate the 2 vessels. and have the lander just enter the atmosphere from that eccentric orbit, and then the kind of interplanetary transfer stage that will later become the main ship will then just decelerate itself, and they'll be a bit more efficient that way. But here we are, rapidly approaching Eve SOI entry. There we are. Can we see the purple planet below us? Yes, we can. So now it's time to transfer down to perform our capture burn. Now, unfortunately, our periapsis is on the dark side of Eve, which means our Eve entry is going to be on the dark side of Eve, so there might not be much to see, but you know what I'll do is I'll just speed the footage up nice and fast so that it won't be too boring. For me, it was very, very tedious. You know what, I'll talk about this when we get to this point in the video, because I'm the worst at doing this, right, where I'll talk about something before it happens, and then it happens, and I'm just like sitting here twiddling my thumbs thinking, I already described in detail what I was doing here, so no, I will refrain from sharing any more information for now, and you know, make sure you like the video. Probably a bit late in the playthrough to say that now. And yeah, comment below if you have anything to add. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, now we are on a... now we've captured around Eve, basically. We're going to run some science experiments from space high above Eve. We can run the same experiments from space near to Eve as well, but we'll kind of do space high above Eve first. There we are. We've got our magnetometer all extended, and yeah, we can, you know, get all the experiments done, and then Bob Kerman can restore them. Although, yep, there we are, restored as well. So yeah, we can run those experiments again from low Eve orbit. But now it's time for the moment that we're all here for. It's time to begin the Eve landing. So first of all, we got Jebediah Kerman and Bob Kerman EVA'd across to the Gemini style command pod. I know we can just transfer them internally, but like, for realism's sake, how are they going to transfer internally? So I felt it would be more appropriate to have them, you know, EVA pack the way across. And tragically, I'm so sorry, guys, I forgot to add EVA experiments again. So we can't do any EVA experiments on the surface of Eve. But you know what? It's fine. We don't need that much more science to unlock the rest of the tech tree. So, you know, kind of annoying that we couldn't do anything on the surface of Eve aside from, I guess, drive the rover around, so that was quite fun. But yeah, we couldn't do any of those experiments, so apologies for that. So now I've extended our de-orbit / lighting rig arms. So yeah, they're going to just extend like that so we can deorbit ourselves and not expend any of the fuel for our main Eve ascent stage. And there we are. We have a periapsis height of 65 kilometers, which I felt would be kind of, you know, safe, I hoped. And I'm quickly setting up some action groups now so that we can deploy our science experiments during entry. We've also got that little white experiment pod just there. It's kind of just below the left hand. I've just clicked it there. Basically what that will allow us to do is collect all of the data, and then we can run it again. Obviously that won't apply to the Science Junior and Mystery Goose, but like the thermometer and the barometer, etc., we can have them just automatically download their science to that white pod thing, and then they can be run again. We haven't got to go get a Kerbal out to reset them, so to speak. So here we are, approaching Eve atmospheric entry. So the atmosphere of Eve starts at 90 kilometers. So we are now in the atmosphere, and already we can see the heat of, well, I've cut to the map screen at a rather unhelpful point. Yeah, now we come back and it's like everything's on fire. But yeah, shout out to the Firefly mod, by the way. That's what's making my re-entry effects look absolutely beautiful. And already we've got some temperature gauges showing up on those heat shields. I'm playing at 100%, or, you know, aka default thermal re-entry strength. What's the setting? I don't know, you guys get it. And as you can see, it wasn't actually enough for us to end up on a suborbital trajectory. We're still, well, that's not the right word. We're not on a landing course. We're now ascending once again, and now we're back in space. So we already actually managed to lower our apoapsis with that pass through. So it'll be our second pass into the atmosphere that we'll actually capture and perform our landing, which gives us actually an opportunity to just gather the science from the science experiments, and, you know, that means that we have that extra redundancy layer, so that if we do lose the Science Junior, we don't end up losing any additional science, because we were able to gather the data and reset the experiment after we completed our first pass through. As you can probably tell, I've switched to the interplanetary vessel, and Bill Kerman can run the experiments and gather science from space low to Eve. We will need to have Bob back on board at some point so he can restore those science experiments so we can run them when we get to Gilly. But, you know, we got time. So yeah, now it's time to time warp around and have another go at landing on Eve. So here we are, time warping around Oh, very scary stuff. We got those air brakes as well. They're just to help with stability mainly. They are very, very weak when it comes to withstanding re-entry heating though, so I guess I was about to say correct myself, but I guess this is technically Eve re-entry now, isn't it? I always do this. I always call it re-entry when I'm going to somewhere like Duna or Eve or somewhere like that, or Lathe. Even though it's not technically re-entry because we didn't start from here, so we're not re-entering. We're entering, but now I guess it is re-entry because we've already entered these atmosphere more than once this mission. So there we are. So there we are. Temperature gauge going there, and as you can see, our apoapsis height from the top left, it's now well below the atmospheric border. So we're not going back to space this time, or at least we will be going back to space with engine power, but not, you know what I mean now, do you guys? Like, this has been a long, old, kind of the same thing for me to narrate over for a while. So forgive me if I'm struggling a bit. Oh, starting to lose it a little bit there. Oh, but it was all fine. It was all fine. We're through the dangerous part of the atmosphere, but now it's time to form a very dangerous heat shield separation. So I'm not going to say anything. You can just watch. And damage report. All looks to be okay. So I'm not going to detach the lower heat shield for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if I detach it now, it's just going to slam up and hit the lander and probably destroy something. But also, we kind of want to maintain as much drag as possible, because if we were to hypothetically not have that lower heat shield, there's a chance we'd start falling too fast and the parachutes would rip off and get destroyed by kind of atmospheric forces. That's why I've made 2 of the parachutes deploy super early, so we're going as slow as possible. Now we're going nice and slowly, 13.2 meters per second. We can detach that lower shield to be fine. I've also got the kind of engine arms deployed there, so we've got those lights shining there, and also it induces a bit more drag on the lander. Now I looked below us and noticed that it looks like the heat shield has actually survived the landing, so I started panicking, trying to steer ourselves clear of it with the air brakes, but then it started glitching out and it's just flown away. You can sort of see it. You'll see it for a bit throughout this mission. You'll see that heat shield just like flying around. Now, as you can see, the footage is going very fast for you guys, but it didn't go very fast for me. I didn't dare use physics time warp for this because I didn't want the parachutes to get destroyed, so I let it all play out in real time. And here is the landing. And we have touchdown, but we're on a bit of a slope here. And as you can see, the lander is sliding, which is one thing I hate about KSP. But I added some grip pads to the base of the rocket. So I very, very nervously started retracting the landing gear sequentially in my hopes that it would sort of fall backwards a little bit and come to rest on the grip pads. So here we are, just very, very carefully. Oh, it's got a bit of a grip there. Should we retract one more? Ah! We have come to a stop. Look at the heat shield in the background there. We have come to a stop. So there we are. Pro tip. The grip pads are great. Use grip pads. It's a real shame the landing legs can't just, have the same level of grip, but whatever. Maybe, yeah, one day. There are actually mods, to be fair, that add like stock equivalent landing gear. They look exactly the same, but they have grippiness, so you don't slide around on things, but whatever. We're running our science experiments just then. You might have missed it because I was speeding the footage up really, really fast, but we did run our science experiments just before we landed from the lower atmosphere. So now Bob can go out and collect it all. So, yeah, do an EVA report as well. Well, I say collect it all. It's all inside that little white science, brick there. Is it the experiment storage bay? I don't know. Science brick is a better name, isn't it? And there we are. And as you can see, the ladders all worked. So that's good because jetpacks do not work on Eve. So we will need the ladders to get back on board the lander. But as you can see, that ladder there, the base, the bottom ladder, it's quite high because we're on a slope. So there was a bit of an issue with that. But don't worry, we were all fine. We didn't need to use cheats or anything. But yeah, Jebediah Kerman there, stealing the spotlight from Bob Kerman and taking the science for himself. I mean, it's fine, right? It's a team effort. It's not like we're going to be deprived of any science, but that's Bob's job, Jebediah. You're the pilot. You've got to do the Eve ascent. I mean, I did everything, but in the reality of this universe, Jebediah is the crack Kermanaut that's going to pilot us to Eve orbit again. So yep, we can plant our Lowne Aerospace flag for one of the final times. Obviously, we're still going to go to Gilly after Eve, but yeah, we are approaching the end of our missions. I mean, in reality, we would carry on playing through, but I'm ending the playthrough at the end of this mission because we've done the tech tree, so we've technically beaten the game, and we'll have beaten the final boss, right? Eve is the final boss of Kerbal Space Program. And yeah, one of the moves of this boss is that, yeah, we can't reach the ladder. I mean, Jebediah, come on, you can. Like, look, he can reach his arms out and grab onto it. But yeah, we couldn't reach the ladder. So I was like, oh no. So I got Bob Kerman to plant another Lowne Aerospace flag here. And yeah, pro tip, Kerbals can actually climb flagpoles. So yeah, can we get back on board by sort of climbing the flagpole? Let's have a look. I mean, the game graciously rotated the lander slightly. It sort of slid a little bit and aligned the ladder up almost perfectly with the flag. And as you can see, Bob Kerman was able to climb aboard the lander very, very, very slowly. I'm going to speed the footage up for you guys. Yeah, it's quite painful to do this in real time. In fact, even the sped up footage, it's still kind of tedious. You're watching this back at 4 times regular speed. I guess I could have tried using physics time warp, but again, I daren't do that, especially because of how like glitchily it's resting on its grip pads, this rocket. I didn't want to risk reloading a quick save and it just exploded upon, you know, physics easing. So yeah, now we got Bob coming back on board. We can deploy our rover. And it sort of fired itself away from the lander because I forgot that by deploying the lander's landing gear, it would have also extended the rover's wheels, which I didn't want to do because that would have meant they were kind of clipping into those fuel tanks. The idea was the rover would have just fallen down and then we could deploy its wheels and it would have deployed much more safely. But I guess it was all fine. I couldn't be bothered to climb down the ladder, so I decided to parachute down, which was, I guess, a bit of a mistake. Bob Kerman almost completely spaghettied just then. But okay, it was fine. Look at that. Look at that lander there. Intimidatingly. Standing there intimidatingly. Is that a word? Doesn't even sound like a real word, does it? It's getting late. What can I say? We're so far into the playthrough at this point. So, yes, we can board the rover. And Jebediah Kerman can board the rover as well. Now, one thing I really should have done, in addition to bringing EVA science, was bring EVA repair kits in case we have an issue with the rover's wheels. But I was like, it's fine. We're just going to drive to a point of interest and deploy its scanning arm and scan it. So we won't need to drive very far. But I was just looking around here and I couldn't really see any points of interest. So the Breaking Ground DLC adds points of interest on the surfaces of planets and moons. And you can scan them with the little rover arms. But I couldn't really find any. I don't know if that's just because they're sort of blending in with the stones that have been added by the Parallax Continued mod. But yeah, and then, we flipped out of control. And I was like, oh no. And as you can see, those two starboard wheels are broken now. So I didn't notice at the time. So I was like, oh, no worries. We'll just get Bob Kerman to kind of go out on EVA and right the rover. And we can, you know, carry on our merry way. It took a while to switch to the right object. So here we go. Why am I taking so long to do this? There we are. so Bob coming there. We can push through and it was all fine. And we can get it back on board and then, the parachute. The parachute triggered just then. And we can deploy the wheels and set off. But as you can see, it no longer works, basically. So that was a shame. So it was a nice idea bringing the rover. If you are a Patreon or YouTube member and download this craft file, then I would probably suggest that you add some EVA repair kits, or just don't bother, right? I mean, rovers have never really worked that well in Kerbal Space Program. Now, we can just run back to the lander from here because they're not that far away. I, frankly, couldn't be bothered, and I was like, well, you know, it's fine. The Kerbals can run there. Look how quick it would have been. But I don't know. I can't be bothered. So I was a bit naughty, guys. I used Vessel Mover just to teleport us a bit closer. Just so I didn't have to sit with the tedium of having to run back. Don't forget, I had to sit and watch this thing re-enter the atmosphere and land in real time. It took ages. And I always get a bit anxious when missions to Eve take a long time. Because obviously, there's a chance the Kraken might destroy the craft and then quick saving and quick loading doesn't work because the craft explodes on respawn, or I might have made some critical blunder during the build and it doesn't end up being able to make it to Eve orbit. Like when I build Eve landers, I do test them, so I just teleport them to the surface of Eve. In the case of this one, I teleported it to a point at Eve sea level, like on the coastline, to make sure it can reach orbit from the coasts, aka sea level, and it worked. But yeah, there's always a chance. I don't know. So yeah, really glitchily trying to yeah, you can see how much of a struggle it was to get Bob Kerman onto the ladder just here. But we eventually did it. He's kind of crab walking up it, isn't he? And then we can just speed up the footage. Well, it's sped up as much as I really can whilst we do the climb here. And yeah, that's basically the EVA of Eve, the Eve EVA. So So there we are. Let me get him on board. And both Kerbals are back on board the Gemini-style command pod. So now it's time to start thinking about the most tricky part of this mission. But first of all, we're going to gradually start detaching things, and hopefully they won't destroy some critical aspect of the lander. Oh, all seems fine. Let's do the next one. Okay, we can just retract those air brakes as well. Again, all seems okay. Ooh. Visual inspection all looks alright, so just gotta ditch the little science brick now. And yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll deploy the rest once we are airborne. They can just like get fired into the surface. So just doing one final little quick stage check, and then we can we'll have to launch at the night time, I'm afraid, because we want to be launching at a point where we can rendezvous with the mothership. So let's have a look. We can just time warp, completely ignoring the mothership. We just want the lander to be kind of underneath the mothership's periapsis. So here we are, rapidly approaching that. There we are. And so with that all done, it's time, guys, to perform Eve liftoff. Now, unlike asparagus staging with the fuel lines, the Aerospike engines won't stop burning once their respective fuel tanks are out of fuel, because of the way the fuel flow priority works. It still supplies everything with fuel, it's just the tanks, it's not concerned with the engines. So I'm having to right-click the tanks, and then when they're empty, that's how I know when to stage. Look at that! We're not even 10 kilometers up yet, and already we've nearly burned all of our peripheral stages. There we are. And now we've expanded those ones. You'll see how rapidly our velocity starts increasing. So I've actually throttled down to, is that 2/3 full throttle just there. And just like, you know, descent, during ascent, Eve's deadly atmosphere is going to be an issue when it comes to the effects of thermal heating. Look at those temperature gauges showing up. So it's really about striking a balance between trying to get through the thickest parts of the atmosphere nice and quickly with our powerful stage, whilst also not going too quickly so we burn up. And there we are, we're at an apoapsis of 105. So yeah, we are suborbital with just our first stage. Well, first stage core, right? I know we had peripheral engines supplying it. And there we are, we're going to start burning basically flat now, because all I care about is raising our perigee, because our apoapsis is fine. So yeah, doing a nice number. Look how much delta V is in this stage. It's such an efficient engine, that cheetah engine. And you've got kind of a porcupine-looking lander just there with the remnants of those decouplers that, you know, held onto the ladders, the Science Juniors, the Science Brick, and the heat shields as well. And yeah, there we are. So I've made a maneuver node. As you can see, we can all finally breathe a sigh of relief. Well, I guess we can't quite breathe a sigh of relief just yet, but the numbers are all fine. We have the thrust-to-weight ratio, and we have the delta V required to perform a safe circularization. I quickly ditched the nose cone just there, so we don't leave it as debris left in space. And we can deploy our little stashed solar panels so that we remain fully charged whilst we wait for a rendezvous point with the mothership. And there we are! Now we can breathe a sigh of relief. We have a circular low Eve orbit. And thus, the final boss of Kerbal Space Program hath been felled. I mean, we've still got to kind of get back to Kerbin, but, you know, we've done the hardest parts of the mission, I think. And, well, for me personally, the hardest part is designing the lander in the first place. But then doing the mission is also pretty tricky, I think. So yeah, now I'm just going to do a series of, you know, time warps and burns to get ourselves on a nice, you know, encounter with the mothership. As you can see, we have loads of delta V remaining, because again, this was designed to be able to launch from sea level, and for this mission we didn't actually launch from there. Now there's going to be a few flashing lights in a second, guys, so if you do suffer from photosensitive epilepsy, close your eyes now. When this sound that's playing now ends, that means it's safe to open your eyes again. But yeah, I time warped in low Eve orbit, and it was very light. There was lots of flashing lights, so I probably should put a little warning just there. But yeah, that's all done, so you can open your eyes again now if you didn't catch the end of that little note just there. And yeah, we've performed our last burn that's going to get us kind of on a nice close encounter with our mothership. As you can see, our relative speed is going to be very high, and we don't have much delta V remaining in this lander, so we have to do the burn using the mothership, which still doesn't have great thrust-to-weight ratio because, you know, it's only got 4 nuclear engines. Look at the delta V as well. As I said earlier, guys, I did massively over-engineer this. It's got 6.5 kilometers of delta V remaining. So yeah, way too much fuel basically. And it means that our burn to match our target speed is going to be very long, so that we're not actually going to get a close encounter at that particular encounter node. So I'm going to do a couple more corrective burns to get nice and close to the target. Now, I did make a little bit of a blunder actually here with the design of the vessel. I tested most things with the vehicle, but I didn't test everything. I thought, it'll be all right on the night. I don't need to test this. Turned out I did. So basically, we have a junior-sized docking port at the back of the ship, and that's what the lander CAD is going to dock to, and then Jeb and Bob can just EVA around and get back on board the mothership. And then the plan was for then the interplanetary transfer vehicle would go to its apoapsis, drop its perigee into the atmosphere of Eve, where we can then detach what remains of the lander and the kind of forward fairing and all that, and have them be destroyed in Eve's atmosphere. But well, again, I did this earlier, didn't I? I said I talk about things before they happen, and then when it happens, I've got nothing to say. So, well, there you go. That's just some foreshadowing of an issue that I ran into. Let us watch the video now and see the target appear. Oh, got a lovely little glimpse of that satellite network that we set up a couple of missions ago. Was it last mission? It was last mission, wasn't it? And yeah, there's the target coming into view there. So relative speed nice and low, under 20 meters per second, and only 300 meter separation. So nice and close. From now on, we can just do the lazy way of reaching the target, where we just keep on pointing towards it, burn for a bit, then burn retrograde, then burn towards the target, etc. until we're there, basically. So yeah, now we can just time warp there, and it's rapidly coming into view. I'm going to give Jeb and Bob a nice little engine wash with our nuclear engines. I mean, they've probably already been exposed to horrendous levels of radiation on the surface of Eve. Kerbals, they're built different. Like, people build bases in Joule, like floating in the air, which would, Jupiter is very, very dangerous for a human to be near in real life because it's so radioactive. But, that's what I mean. Kerbals, they're just built different, I guess. That, or they just have amazing lead-lined suits. I don't know. I don't know how the glass could be lead-lined, but, well, can you get leaded glass? I don't know. I don't care to pause and Google things. Anyway, this is where I mentioned I made a bit of a blunder just here. So everything is now docked together. Now we can point retrograde, making sure we're controlling from the Apollo-style command pod. And, well, we'll do a retrograde burn from apoapsis. As you can see, our orbital velocity is 1,422 meters per second. And that's not changing. I'm guessing that the Eve lander, or what remains of it, is blocking the engines from being able to provide thrust, which is very annoying. So we can't actually decelerate and ditch the lander. So I was like, oh no, we're going to have to just leave it in like eccentric Eve orbit. So I don't know. I feel like, is this really my fault? I feel like in reality it wouldn't matter. Like the engines would, yes, probably destroy like critical structural parts of the lander, but it doesn't matter because we just want to get rid of it, right? So it doesn't really matter if it gets destroyed by the engine wash. So yeah, kind of a shame. So we left it. We still ditched the forward kind of fairing piece and let that deorbit, but yeah, we're not going to be able to deorbit the lander on this occasion. Oh, how frustrating. I mean, again, it wasn't really my fault, right? So I feel like I wouldn't lose too much sleep if I just terminated it in the tracking station. Whatever, I guess you guys will have to be the judge of that in the comment section down below. So now you can see I'm raising my apoapsis to intercept with Gilly's orbit. Gilly is a tricky old one to reach because a couple of reasons. A, it has tiny, tiny surface gravity, so getting an encounter with it is more like docking with a spacecraft rather than reaching a planet or moon because its sphere of influence and gravity well is so low that getting encounters with it is like pinpoint precision. The other thing that makes it difficult to visit, as you can probably tell, is that it's on a very high and very eccentric orbit, so kind of needs big burns to reach despite its small size. So there we are. I've put our orbit to intercept Gillies. Now I'm just going to play around with Maneuver Node Maker, try and get a nice close Gilly encounter, which we can. So there we are. Lovely, lovely stuff. This might seem like an inefficient way of reaching Gilly, but again, Gilly's surface gravity is so low that the O-berth effect may as well not exist, so kind of sort of matching your orbit around Eve to Gilly's and then getting the encounter from there, it's basically just as efficient. So there we are, we have our Gilly encounter just there. As you can see, look how short that line is. That gives you an idea of just how tiny Gilly's sphere of influence is. And again, once you get the circular orbit, it takes literally a tiny, tiny amount of delta V to actually not only deorbit ourselves, put us on a basically vertical descent down to the surface, and there it is, looking like a little old potato down there. So there's our capture burn there. I thought about capturing, but I thought let's just go straight for the collision, as in like a landing trajectory. Again, look at that. What's our orbital speed? Our orbital speed is 0.9 meters per second. I mean, I guess we are descending directly down, but you get it, right? So now we're going to get Bob Cohen to quickly go and restore the Mystery Goo and the Science Junior so that we can run them from space high above Gilly and space low to Gilly. I really hope at no point in this commentary I said the word Ike instead of Gilly, because I don't know, for whatever reason, I was just thinking of Ike throughout this mission. Like, when I planted the flag, I must admit, guys, I sort of cut the footage because I was too embarrassed, but now I'm telling you, so whatever. I wrote, we've landed on Ike, and then I left. It was only after I was editing the footage, I was like, why did I call it Ike? But now Ike is in my head, and so if I ever call it Ike, or if I've called it Ike throughout this mission, then yeah, I apologize. I do know, I'm not stupid, I hope. Yeah, that was another little weird blunder I made. I guess I was just going a little bit cuckoo crazy because I'd just done, you know, the Eve mission, which was very stressful. So yeah, there's a reason why I don't really go to Eve very often, even though I'm a semi-professional player of this game, because Eve, it is just a frustrating old place to go to because the engines in Kerbal Space Program are not optimized for it. They're optimized for Kerbin. So yeah, I would like to have a go at some sort of Eve rotorcraft, so one that uses propellers, to raise the craft kind of high enough up in the atmosphere and I can deploy an engine. I know Jamie Logan Aerospace, very underrated channel, by the way, go check that out, has done a Eve lander that uses like helicopter blades. That was really, really small and efficient. So it is something I'd like to do at some point, but you know, I've not done that for this mission. I mean, there's something so viscerally cool about a rocket, right? A little helicopter, I don't know, doesn't compare. I don't know. Anyway, here we are coming down for a nice gentle descent. We've run our science experiments from space low to Gilly. So now we're going to wait until we've landed. So have a look at the top right where it says situation with the Kerbal Engineer readout. We want that to say landed. So are you ready? It still says in space low. In space low. Landed in space low. We did a little bounce. As you can see, Gilly's surface gravity is very low. Landed, and it stayed landed. So like, right, let's run our experiments here. And then now that's all done, it's fine. Doesn't matter if the lander drifts back into space low because we've done all the science we need to do from the lander itself. But of course, Bob Kerbin still needs to go down, gather a surface sample, and for real this time, plant the final Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one flag, on the surface of Gilly. And there we go. We raise a glass. Beautiful. And I definitely didn't call the flag plant site Ike. So how's Bob going to celebrate? Whoa! He did a well cool front flip. Front flip to jetpack maneuver straight into the mothership. Well, I guess just the ship now at this point. Ignoring the fact that there's still the lander cam orbiting Eve. And there we are. Now it's time to head on back home. So we're just going to go straight up, circularize and then exit Gilly's sphere of influence. To make things easier as well, I'm going to circularize around Eve, like in a sort of medium, well, high, medium orbit around Eve, and we'll just plot a maneuver node from there. I did not care to be efficient because look how much delta, we got over 4 km per second of delta V remaining. So yeah, we didn't need to be efficient whatsoever here. So if I were to be efficient, if this were to hypothetically be a tutorial, you might say, what you'd want to do is drop your periapsis to be nice and close to Eve, and then perform your burn from Eve to Kerbin as close to periapsis as possible to make the most of the O-berth effect. Because we got so much fuel, it didn't really matter. So just for ease of simplicity, and you know, when it comes to plotting the maneuver node, I just circularized from here, and I was like, fine, we will do our burn from this height here. So yeah, we'll set Kerbin as our target. And basically just try and force an encounter really inefficiently. But yeah, so we've got to do a little bit of a mid-course correction burn just there. But there we are. A lovely Kerbin encounter. Nice. So yeah, we'll just perform our escape burn. So yeah, it's 1,221, I think it was, meters per second of delta V. If we were close to Eve's periapsis, it would be much, much lower than that. But again, we don't need to be efficient. But just in case you need to be efficient, then that's what you do. And that's my story. That's my tutorial. The tutorial section of my Eve mission. I have done a dedicated Eve tutorial if anyone is interested. I mean, if you just like search on YouTube, Matt Lowne Eve tutorial should come up. But yeah, so there's our mid-course correction maneuver plan plotted. We're just going to fine-tune it now. So we're going to enter Kerbin's sphere of influence. Now we're going to be coming in fairly fast, but it's not going to be a problem because we are using an ablative heat shield. And as I've mentioned many times throughout this playthrough, the ablative heat shield is very, very, very overpowered. Like it's basically indestructible. Like it's not completely indestructible, but I don't think I've ever really had a situation where the ablative heat shield was completely destroyed. I think the only times I've had to double up ablative heat shields was for small landers descending in, well, let's say landers, like science bombs going down into Joule, because Joule is like very, very harsh, but I feel like that's understandable, right? Other than that, I've never had an issue with the ablative heat shields. So there we are, 27 kilometer periapsis seemed safe. I think I did try and play around with that a little bit by putting ourselves normal, disabling SAS, enabling RCS, and using the little RCS thrusters on the command pod, but I couldn't really get any better than 27. Either it would be too low or too high, so 27 it is. As we, well, it seems the game has renamed our Eve ship to Eve ship ship. I think obviously when the vessel was split, one became Eve ship lander, one became Eve ship ship. Don't know. Anyway, where is Cove? I can just see it there. That little blue marble appearing before us. How long are we on? 404 days. Oh, we got a little cheeky mum encounter just there. Jebediah, Bob, and Bill finally can make it home for the last time. So there we are. We're going to do another danger re-entry. Look at those fireworks showing up. I don't like talking too much because it's just funny just watching everything explode, but yeah, that's pretty much all the big explosions done now, isn't it? And there is Kerbin going forward. It'd be nice to get a splashdown, right, because that's kind of more akin to Apollo. And in fact, there was a plan for Apollo to go to Venus, which is obviously the real-life analog of Eve. I've done a recreation of the the Venus Apollo missions for going to Eve. That was in KSP2 though, so I guess my KSP2 videos get no views anymore because why? But you know, it's kind of the same sort of game engine, so if you want to check that out, then by all means you can search that up. But there we are. We've got a lovely kind of view of the sun just there, casting those lovely golden rays over the ocean as we come down for our final landing / splashdown. Yeah, it's a beautiful sight. It's a beautiful sight, but you know what would be even more beautiful? Seeing how much science we unlocked from this mission. So let's go ahead and recover the vessel and have a look. Whoa, nearly 7,000 science. So loads to play around with and more than enough to complete the tech tree. Let's just tidy up the launch pad quickly and have a look. So unlike before where I've talked about what I'm choosing, I'm just clicking everything blindly and just unlocking everything because that's what we need to do at this stage. And there we are. The Rapier engine hath been unlocked and the tech tree has been conquered. And so brings an end to this Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. I very much hope you enjoyed the journey. And if you made it this far into the video, then congratulations. This is probably, I think, my longest ever video I've uploaded to this channel. So, you know, I hope it was something you enjoyed. I think it's going to be certainly going to be interesting watching an entire playthrough in one go. I'm kind of experimenting with this sort of thing. So if it worked, let me know, and I can do this for kind of other series I do. Edit them concurrently so I can make one big movie version at the end. But I'll have to leave the judgment down to you in the comments. And of course, massive thank you to the names on the right hand side of the screen, my patrons and YouTube channel members who make all of this content possible. If your name is there, then sincere thank you for your support. And if you want to consider joining, then there are links below. You get things like the craft files used in this playthrough. But that is the end. So thank you for watching once again, and goodbye.